Listen, O isles, unto me, and hearken, ye people from far. The Lord hath called me from the womb, from the bowels of my mother hath he made mention of my name. And he hath made my mouth like a sharp sword, in the shadow of his hand hath he hid me, and made me a polished shaft, in his quiver hath he hid me. You are listening to the Shannon Davis Podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome aboard to the Shannon Davis Show. We've got a great one for you today. We're going to have this hour Dr. Nehemia Gordon. He's on the cutting edge of Bible research. NehemiasWall.com is his website. And today is a live show, Tuesday, June 10th, 2025. Nehemia, welcome back to the broadcast. How you doing?
Hey, it's great to be back on. Thanks for having me.
It has been a while, and I ask you to forgive me because I should have had you scheduled before now, but I dropped the ball. But thank you for waiting on me.
No problem.
And we finally got it together. In between some international trips you've been doing, you've been a busy guy. I've been following your work, and you're doing an awesome job. Nehemia, would you be so kind as to open us up in prayer today?
Sure. Yehovah, Avinu Sheba Shamayim, O Heavenly Father, Yehovah, give us wisdom today as we share truths revealed in your word. Amen.
I say amen to that. And welcome, folks. We're just going live, so please invite a friend. This could be an awesome show. Nehemia, I thought I would take you down some rabbit trails today.
Okay.
And maybe we could call this Down the Rabbit Hole with Nehemia or Q&A with Nehemia Gordon. One and the same thing. I've been saving up a bunch of questions for you, and so they will be kind of unorganized. I just kind of wrote them as I recalled them, but I'm going to pick your brain today because, listen, I have the utmost respect for you, and I figure if there's anyone that can answer my questions, Nehemia Gordon, because he's the man. I want to say this.
Hopefully I can answer them correctly.
Well, I have faith in you, my friend. You're going to do good. I just want to share a quick story. I had the honor to meet Nehemia way back, bro, in 2007. And Nehemia, make a long story short, my brother Damon calls me one day. And he says, hey, man, you want to go to Israel? He said, I've been invited to go over by the Minister of Tourism, a guy named Rami Levy. This was 2007.
Oh, wow.
And he said, we're going to go over and, meet with him. And my brother had a couple ministry clients, and they were thinking about organizing some tours, things like that. Well, I said, man, I'd love to go. But I've got tickets to a Celine Dion concert in Las Vegas. How long's the trip going to be? Because I'm already booked. I got my ticket and all that, and I'm supposed to go to a Steve Vai concert too. He said, listen, I'm going to be there about 2 weeks, but if you can stay for a few days, come on. I said, okay, let's do it. So I jumped on a plane, Nehemia, and I went to Israel. I had a blast, and they took us down to Galilee area, and then I finished my duties down there, and I came up to Jerusalem, and I remember calling you or emailing you rather, and I said, hey, Nehemia, I'm in town. You got a chance to meet? Nehemia said, sure. And so you took me down to some coffee shop, and they served some great hot tea with mint. Okay. And Nehemia brings in his laptop, and he begins to show me some of the cutting edge research he's working on, looking for the divine name of God in the original Hebrew scrolls. And you were showing me some of the research you were doing, and it got me so excited. Now, that was 2007.
That was a long time ago. Yeah.
It was, and you've come a long way then. So I just want to say I got to meet the man, and he's on the tip of the spear in terms of all this research he's been doing. Now, Nehemia, I'm just going to just asking you some questions tonight. Since we last talked, I know that you have been working on a number of projects, but one in particular I want to ask you about is searching for Hebrew scrolls of the Tanakh with the name of God, Yehovah,
Mhm.
intact. And you had a team working for you. Was one of the guys named T-Bone or Pitbull or something like that?
That was his nickname, T-Bone. He wanted to remain anonymous to the public,
Okay.
so
Okay.
we called him T-Bone.
I just remember you sharing that you had a team composed of T-Bone and some others, and you were all working on searching out manuscripts. And where does the grand tally sit right now in terms of?
That's a very complicated question. Just first of all, to clarify, there's we have two kinds of let's call them documents. We have manuscripts. We have a codex and a scroll. A codex is like what you see behind me, right? It's just like a book, right? But we call that a codex. And then a scroll is something that's rolled up. So what we were focusing on was actually not scrolls, but the plural of codex is either codices or codexes. I prefer codexes. So we were working on codexes because the scrolls generally don't have vowels. And when they have vowels, the vowels were usually added much later after the scroll was used, although not always. There's very rarely scrolls that have originally vowels. Actually, some today even. So the grand total we had gotten up was over 2,000. So here's really what happened, okay? And I wrote a book about this. I'm not going to go into that much detail, but so the name of God, Yud-He-Vav-He, is written. It's generally assumed we don't know what the vowels are, right? That's an assumption in biblical studies. Is the Jews stopped pronouncing it because there was a prohibition in Jewish culture to speak the name. The rabbis created this prohibition that you're not allowed to speak the name. In fact, there's a statement in the Mishnah that all of Israel has a portion in the world to come, right? So it's interesting. In Christianity, there's this idea that called universalism, which says everyone's saved. If you're, and then there's another verse that says all Christians are saved. And of course, not all Christians agree with that, right? So in Judaism, there's a statement in rabbinical Judaism. All of Israel is in Sanhedrin in the Mishnah chapter 10. All of Israel has a portion in the world to come, which is, I guess, the equivalent of saved in Judaism. And then it says except. And there's a list of people who don't have a portion in the world to come. And one of those is people who speak the name the way it's written. Right? So the teaching is when you see the letters Yud-He-Vav-He, you're supposed to read them as Adonai or sometimes as Elohim. Okay. And if you read them the way they're actually written, then you, let's say, translating into Christian terms, you lose your salvation. Well, I'm not too concerned about what the rabbis say. So if I see the letters Yud-He-Vav-He in the Hebrew Bible over 6,000 times, I say, why wouldn't we read it? And especially since we have a commandment which says it's a commandment to Aaron and his descendants, what we call the Kohanim, the priests. And the commandment is they will place my name upon the children of Israel and I will bless them. It's in Numbers 6. And there's a 3-line blessing. And in that 3 lines of the blessing, each line has the name Yud-He-Vav-He. And the rabbis themselves admit, well, when this was done in the temple, they were required to use the actual pronunciation of the name because it says in number 6, they shall place my name upon the children of Israel and I will bless them. So placing the name on the people is to actually speak it. So what happened is the rabbis, somewhat later than that, said, okay, the temple's destroyed. We're not going to speak the name anymore. And anybody who does loses their portion in the world to come. And how do we know that's true? Because the rabbis tell us. Which, well, like I said, I don't obey the rabbis. So I wanted to know how to speak this name. And I'll make a long story short. I've spoken about this many times. I'm sure I've spoken about it on your show. There are some manuscripts that have the name. In most manuscripts, the name is missing a vowel. Okay, that's the important thing here. And it's not obvious how to even why it's missing the vowel is not obvious. My hypothesis, and I later found out there was another scholar in Germany who came up with the same hypothesis, is they left out one of the vowels so people wouldn't accidentally pronounce it or maybe intentionally pronounce it.
Oh.
Okay. And the reason and the point here is that if there's a missing vowel, right? So the Hebrew structure is in every consonant, well, I guess in every language, in every consonant you have to have a vowel. Maybe not like in like Welsh or something like that, right? But generally, the way Hebrew works is you have a consonant and then a vowel, and then you could have an open syllable or a closed syllable. Open syllable is followed by a consonant. and then a closed syllable is, right? So you have to have a vowel there. You can't just have two consonants without a vowel between them. Even if there's what's called a semi-vowel, then you have to have that. Or if it's the end of a syllable, then you have a symbol that indicates it's the end of a syllable. This symbol is missing, whether it's a vowel or the end of a consonant. And it's missing, I hypothesized, and another scholar before me hypothesized in 1999, I believe he already put out that theory, although I wasn't aware of it till maybe 10 years ago, that it's the scribes left out one of the vowels so people wouldn't pronounce it, because there was a prohibition to pronounce it, and you could just out of habit accidentally pronounce it. Okay, so I ended up finding 3 manuscripts over a number of years that had the full vowels. And one of the criticisms that was levied against my discovery was, well, that's just 3 manuscripts. So that's just 3 scribes who happened to put a vowel, and they didn't always put it in. They only put it in some places. So I said, okay, you're saying it's only 3, and that's an exception to the rule, and doesn't really prove anything. Let's see if there's more than 3. I don't know. So around 2016, what happened is there was this worldwide project to start digitizing the manuscripts and making them available online, something which had happened before, but on a very limited scale. There were manuscripts that were photographed, and you had to buy these books that were very expensive, sometimes hundreds or thousands of dollars, to even see what was in the manuscripts, right? What you would end up, what scholars worked on for hundreds of years was other scholars would go look at the manuscript and tell them what was in it. And if there was something they didn't think was important, they just left it out. So around 2016, we start to have access to the photos of the manuscripts. And I immediately see, wow, not only is it in 3 manuscripts, I've now found it in 4 manuscripts, 5 manuscripts, 6. I actually traveled thousands of miles to see the what ended up being the 4th manuscript. This is before the digitization, like 2015. And then within a few months, we go from 4 to 5 to 50. And my goal, here was my goal. This is crazy. Wow. My goal at one point was, okay, I want to get to 10 in my lifetime. That's my goal. 10 manuscripts that have the full vowels, the vowels Yehovah. And look, honestly, if we have two witnesses, maybe that proves it, right? But the criticism, and this is one of the things I'm dealing with, there's a lot of moving the goalposts. People will say, oh, well, so literally the same person said to me, he said, well, that's only 3 manuscripts. And so I traveled thousands of miles to go get the 4th manuscript. It was in Cincinnati, Ohio, if memory serves me. And I could have gone a shorter trip, but I didn't have the money. But anyway, so it ended up being thousands of miles travel. So the same person later, when we exceed over 1,000, he said, well, yeah, of course, that's in all the manuscripts because those are the vowels of Adonai, which they're not, but that's a different question. Right? So there's some moving the goalposts. Right. Well, it's only 3. Okay. Well, now it's over. Now it's 1,000. Oh, well, yeah, of course it's in all the manuscripts. Well, it's not in all the manuscripts. There's a percentage of the manuscripts that don't have the full vowels at all, not anywhere, not even a single time. And the surprising thing is the later the manuscripts get, the more so what I found so far is the later the manuscripts, the more likely they are not to have the full vowels, which is counterintuitive and a bit surprising, but that seems to be the case. So you asked what the number is. So here's one of the problems. There was this really important discovery by one of my colleagues recently, which is that when we talked about manuscripts, up until now, we were talking about shelf marks. What's a shelf mark? You see there's a bookshelf behind me. I don't know. Do you remember when you were a kid, there was the Dewey Decimal System?
Right. So
every book there has a code. And when I look in the index, right, and they had like little cards back in the day. Even in our generation, right, we were taught, I'm sure you were taught, you have like a shelf with tiny little index cards, and each book has an index card that corresponds to it, right? Well, now it's computers. What's that?
The card catalog. I used to
card catalog, exactly. So every card in the card catalog corresponds to a book, and it has a little code, and that's called a shelf mark, okay? And in libraries, they don't use the Dewey Decimal System. They use a different system. Well, let's say for manuscripts, they use a different system. They'll often talk about the size of the manuscript, which is important because, right, you want all the books of the same size to be on the same shelf, right? These are smaller books than these books here. those who are listening, I'm pointing to the background from. This is a photo I took at the Bologna University Library, the oldest university in the world in Bologna, Italy.
Oh, beautiful.
And the library isn't original, meaning it's only like 400 or 500 years old or something, right? I was once I was at Oxford University. And I was looking at this old Torah scroll, and this scholar comes in from Israel, walks in the library, and he was a British scholar that he'd lived in Israel, and he said, "Wow, that's really old." I said, "No, it's only about 800 years old." And he said, "Well, it's old enough," in his British accent. So, all right. So the point is, we were looking at shelf marks. What happened was there were a lot of shelf marks that didn't. We thought shelf marks corresponded to. We kind of knew it didn't, but for all practical purposes, we would say a shelf mark. We would say a manuscript. We really meant a shelf mark. And so there were over 2,400 shelf marks that we had with the full vowels. Well, it turned out, and we still don't know what the number is. This is going to be a multi-year long project. We're trying to use AI. It hasn't been successful at the moment. But what we have is a lot of these manuscripts, they fall apart into many, many pieces. And we say, oh, here's 10 shelf marks. Well, those 10 shelf marks are really one manuscript. Okay, so maybe the number is less than 2,400. But then, and that part we actually knew. We didn't know we did not know the scale or the extent of it. We thought here and there, yeah, we think it's multiple shelf marks in a single manuscript, but it's probably not that common. But no, it turned out to be very common in one of the most important collections in the world. So that was problem A. Problem B, and really these are discoveries, is that there were single shelf marks that were multiple manuscripts. Oh. So we have literally a book on the shelf, and you open it up, and you think that's one manuscript, meaning 800 or 1,000 years ago, a scribe sat down and wrote this book. Well, no. What happened is a bunch of books fell apart, and somebody took those pages and put them into a single volume.
Okay.
So is it more or less than 2,400? My guess is it's less than 2,400, but I don't know that at the moment. Right? 2,400
individual pages, or 2,400?
Oh, no, it's tens of thousands, maybe over 100,000 individual pages. I don't know the number of individual pages. There's one collection in St. Petersburg, Russia, that has over 90,000 pages. That's one collection.
Amazing.
You go to Cambridge University, and they have fragments from the Kyrogenies, sometimes the fragments are this big, sometimes they're this big, and sometimes they're huge, right? Many, many pages, and each fragment is its own shelf mark, and there, of course, it's obvious that multiple fragments will make up a single manuscript, but we don't know how many, right? So when you say cutting edge, this is the current challenge that we face at the moment. What are the manuscripts we have of the Bible? So, and here we have in Tanakh or Old Testament studies, we have a challenge, which when we look at our brothers in New Testament studies, we can see how bad our challenge is. So in the New Testament studies, you'll hear there's over 5,000 manuscripts of the New Testament, something like that, right? I think there are over 5,800, and the number keeps growing. Well, the number's growing around the edges here and there where they're going to libraries, finding new manuscripts. But the bulk of them have been known for, if not decades, for maybe 100 years. Most of them, the really important ones, have been known for over 100 years. That is not the situation in Old Testament studies, right? We've got a bunch of It's funny. I read this journal academic article from like the 70s, and they're talking about the 4 key manuscripts. And then you read one from the 80s, and they'll talk about the 5 key manuscripts. And then you'll hear the 9 key manuscripts, and then the number keeps growing because we don't really even have like a centralized database of what all the manuscripts are. So in New Testament studies, they have the Gregory Allen list. So Gregory made a list, and Allen and his wife expanded it. Allen and his wife. So every manuscript you have like a reference for, right? There's like a number, not of the things on the shelf, but of the actual manuscript, at least in theory. We don't have that in the Old Testament, right? One scholar will talk about the manuscript in one way, and another scholar will publish a study, and it'll be the same exact manuscript, and then people don't know they're talking about the same manuscript. So,
that brings up a good question then for you. In the documents that you have found that have the name of Yehovah,
Mm-hmm.
Have you thought about building a database?
We're
so
working
that
on that. I, in fact, established an institute called the Institute for Hebrew Bible Manuscript Research, IHBMR. We have some of the top scholars in the world that are researching there or are consulting for the IHBMR. That's a purely academic endeavor there. And one of the main goals is to find out and document what are the manuscripts of the Hebrew Bible, right? Because it's so much more fundamental, the problem, than how to pronounce the name of God, right? That's my private passion that I have, right? But scholarship overall, in general, doesn't even know what all the Bible manuscripts are. A couple of years ago, there was a dialogue going on among some of the top scholars in the world because one of our colleagues published about this manuscript that apparently had been known to decades, just wasn't known to us. Meaning the scholars back in the 60s knew about this manuscript because it became famous. And then everybody sort of forgot about it. And it's a manuscript in Tbilisi, Tbilisi, Georgia. That was a Freudian slip, perhaps.
Yeah.
Tbilisi, Georgia, the country, not the state in the United States. And they called it the Tbilisi Codex. Now there's people who call it by a different name, Lailashi Codex. Right, so here we have a codex that people are talking about. They're saying it's 9th, 10th century. That was the belief is to some extent. And we're like, wait a minute, we have a handful of manuscripts from this period, and there's one we don't know about, and it's almost complete. How is this possible? Right. So we have a challenge. What are the manuscripts? And then a lot of the libraries, which are doing amazing work. Let's give an example. The British Library is doing astounding work. They're one of the first libraries to digitize their collection.
Yes.
Okay, well, what are the Bible manuscripts of the British Library? Well, they're not interested in the Bible. They're interested in the manuscripts. Well, they have manuscripts of like a medical text from the 12th century. I just made that up. I don't know if that's correct, right?
Right.
But meaning they have all kinds of manuscripts from all kinds of periods, right? And they're not interested in the Hebrew Bible per se. So that's not what they gear their database for. So when you go to them and say, and you don't go to them, you go to their website and say, what are all the Bible manuscripts? You're not going to find the answer to that. You're going to find, there's a commentary on the Bible, right? When you type in Bible manuscripts, you'll find, oh, here's a commentary on the Bible from the 14th century. Okay, I'm not interested in the commentaries at this moment. I want to know what the manuscripts of the Bible itself are. What are those? Yes. Who knows?
Well, let's say, for example, I was at a library, and just for the sake of this discussion, I came across a manuscript, and I'm looking, and I said, oh, there's the name of Yehovah. I got to call Nehemia. So I would call you, and we would need to know if you have already seen this before. You probably had. And if so, we would move on to the next. So are you?
So at this point, honestly, there are so many. Well, and then here's another major factor that comes into it. So let me talk about the Cairo Geniza. So Geniza is a term that appears in ancient Jewish sources, and it's a room usually in the synagogue, or it could be a cave. A Geniza could be almost anything. In Israel, there are giant dumpsters, and I mean dumpsters where normally you put garbage, but they're Geniza dumpsters.
Oh,
and
no.
only sacred books are put in those dumpsters.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So a Geniza is a receptacle. It could be a broom closet. It could be a dumpster. It could be a box in the synagogue. It could be a lot of different things. And the Geniza is where you put old books. So every synagogue around the world had and should still have a Geniza. And like I said, it literally could just be a box in the back of the synagogue somewhere, or it could be an entire room. So in Cairo, there was a Geniza that had books in it, and it wasn't just books. It was anything written in Hebrew letters. It didn't even have to be in Hebrew. It could be in Arabic, but written in Hebrew letters. And in 1896, there were these two sisters traveling through Cairo. They were actually going to the St. Catherine's Monastery in the Sinai Desert. And on their way, they passed through Cairo. And somebody said to them, hey, we understand these weren't scholars. They were just kind of collectors. They said, we understand you're trying to buy old books and documents. We've got some here in our synagogue. And they're like, yeah, whatever. We're going to St. Catherine's Monastery, which is one of the I think it's the oldest continually used monastery maybe in the world. I'm not really sure. In the Sinai Desert. It's where they have the Codex Sinaiticus, or it's where it was discovered anyway. One of the most important manuscripts of the New Testament in Greek. And so anyway, these sisters, they buy some documents and they bring them back to England or to the United Kingdom, and they eventually get into the hands of a professor at Cambridge, and he discovers the lost book of Hebrew source of the book of Ben Sira. What is Ben Sira? So there's a book in the Apocrypha. The Apocrypha are the Old Testament books in Greek that were not included in the Jewish Bible. So if you look at the oldest manuscripts of the Greek Septuagint, and more importantly, the Septuagint preserved by the Greek Orthodox Church, that is the translation of the Old Testament in Greek, then you will see that there are books that aren't in the Hebrew, entire books. And one of those is called the Wisdom of Sirach, or Ben Sira. And the Wisdom of Ben Sira is of particular interest because it says in the introduction that it's a translation from Hebrew. So we know it was written in Hebrew unless he's lying. And what these two Scottish sisters in 1896 found in the Cairo Geniza was the Hebrew original of Ben Sira. So it was known in Greek for thousands of years, but the Hebrew original was lost. And then it was found in this broom closet in the synagogue, right, in this Geniza.
Wow.
And then they go to the Geniza and they take out hundreds of thousands of fragments. And like I said, some of them are this big, some of them are, many, many pages. So what is in the Geniza? Well, that only became available to really even to scholars, meaning in the past, what you had to do is you would have to get on a plane and go to Cambridge and sit in the library, and you would ask to see these binders. Actually, before that, it was just boxes, like loose pages. But more recently, they have them in these binders, and they're sewn into mylar, it's kind of like a plastic that protects them. And if you're lucky and you go for, I don't know, a month, you could go through thousands of fragments. But there's 196,000 fragments is the estimate I heard at Cambridge alone. There's also dozens of libraries that have fragments of the Cairo Geniza. So what are all the fragments that have the name with full vowels? Well, now most of those are digitized and available online, and I've started going through them. And I gave up after a certain point because there are just so many. And then we have so if you were to find one, I'd be like, okay, yeah, we have lots of those, right? And I've stopped counting because there's so many. Now, that doesn't mean I won't ever count in the future. I may in the future, but the problem, like I said, is if we have, let's call it 20 or 30,000 fragments just of the Tanakh with vowels in the Cairo Geniza, that's my estimate at the moment. Well, that might not be 20 or 30,000 manuscripts. That's 20 or 30,000 shelf marks. Maybe it's 1,000 manuscripts. I don't know. We're going to need something like AI to determine that, I think.
Okay, I think that's a good answer to my question. That is complicated.
That's the short answer.
Yeah.
So we have. And then I didn't tell you the new thing. This was all the background. So the new thing is there's something they call the European Geniza. What's the European? So the Cairo Geniza was an actual closet in the synagogue, sort of like a closet, a little chamber. The European Geniza is by analogy. It's not actually a Geniza. What the European Geniza is, you see these books behind me, and these are from the Bologna University Library. These aren't Hebrew books per se, right? These are just books in the library. Well, when these books would get damaged, they would cut up old books and use them in the binding. So those are called binding fragments.
Oh,
we are at the sort of precipice or the gateway to a whole new era in research, because people are starting to go through these binding fragments and document them. And you can take out your iPhone or your Android and get a photo without even taking apart the old book. And so now we have thousands of binding fragments, which they're calling the European Geniza. And sometimes, sometimes you end up finding in these binding fragments like lost works, right? Now in this case, it's not a lost work. We're looking for the Tanakh, right? And we know it's in the Tanakh, the Old Testament. Just we're looking for more copies of it. So when all is said and done, let's say 100 years from now, and we know everything that's in all, hopefully by then we know everything that's in all the Genizas, I can't even imagine what the number is going to be. We might find out that there's 10,000 manuscripts of the Old Testament that was preserved, and maybe we'll find out there's only, 2,000, but we thought there were 10,000 because there were lots of different pieces.
Well, you've got at least 1,000 at this juncture, though. We could say 1,000 would be
Like I said, the number we stopped counting at was in the 2400s.
Okay, that's a lot. Folks, we're live with Dr. Nehemia Gordon. I got a bunch of questions, and each of these questions we could do a whole show on.
I'll try to be brief, although my nickname is Short Story Long.
But listen, I'm the marathon man, so I can go 6 hours if I need to. So we'll meet somewhere in the middle. Okay.
Like I say, when the coffee ends, so does the teaching.
Folks, I'm excited to have Nehemia here. Really, I just love the research you're doing. Okay, I'm going to ask you some rapid fire questions.
All right.
Since our last show, I understand there's been discovery of a new manuscript called the Sassoon manuscript that was made available and bought at an auction. I mean, we had the Aleppo Codex, the Leningrad Codex, and then the Sassoon. Did you get a chance to?
So they call it the Sassoon Codex. So it's not a new discovery. It was a manuscript that was known. It's been known probably since, I would guess, the 1950s. And I say, well, I mean, it was known before that. So there was this Jewish merchant named Sassoon. And I always forget, is he Solomon David Sassoon or David Solomon Sassoon? There was one guy that was SD and the other that was DS, right? David Solomon, David. And they were like father and son, I think. So it was one of the Sassoons who in the 1920s, he has this, he was from a Jewish family from Baghdad. And they, many Baghdadi Jews end up moving to India when the British and other Europeans start to take over India. And they're like, oh, okay, well, we can speak the local languages. We'll become your merchants. And then he ends up eventually in Hong Kong and then eventually in England. And so he ends up with this international merchant empire stretching from London to Hong Kong. And he's got all this money and he wants to invest it in Jewish studies and Jewish causes. And so he ends up buying all these manuscripts. And in the 1920s, he buys a manuscript that he realizes is really, really old and really important. In the 50s, they photograph it. Remember, so up until the 50s, we're relying on what other people say is in the manuscript. In the 50s, they photograph it, but the photographs aren't actually available to everybody. So you have to kind of be one of a small cadre of scholars to get access to the photos.
Yes.
There was a book published maybe like little over 10 years ago, I want to say, maybe 2014. And it mentions that the Sassoon Codex was owned by a private, and we knew it was sold. It's kind of a crazy story. So in England, in the United Kingdom, in England, they have something that Americans call the death tax. The death tax is a tax your estate pays when you die. And in the UK, the death tax is so crippling that when a really rich person dies, he has to sell off a lot of his assets for his family to pay it. And so they end up selling off this codex. And it's bought by the British Railway like pension fund or some like random thing like that. Just as an investment. They have no interest in Hebrew manuscripts. They ended up selling it a few years later. And then it's in turn sold to another person. And that person, whose name was Jacques-Yves Safra, who is a businessman in Geneva, Switzerland, he owns it from 1989 all the way up until it was sold a few years ago for $38.1 million. My understanding is the highest price ever paid for a book. There are documents that people paid more for. I think it was like a copy of the Declaration of Independence. $38 million. Yeah, so it's worth whatever anyone will pay for it. I would say it's priceless. This was a debate that some scholars had. One scholar said, no, I don't think anybody should pay more than $10 million. And I said, you're clearly not a Bible scholar. From a biblical scholarly perspective, it's priceless. And the thought was maybe somebody would pay 30 to 50 million. That was the estimate. And I said, 50 million, that's like giving it away. What are you talking about? Of course, I don't have 30 or 50 million, so that's easy for me to say. But no, it's priceless. It's priceless because and I'll try to explain this really briefly. So long story short, this businessman buys it in 1989 and he puts it in a safe and doesn't take it out for decades. And there was a rumor that he owned it. And every time I would meet people who seemed like they had a lot of money, because I kind of assumed all rich people know each other, I would say, do you know this businessman Safra? And they would say, no, I don't. And I literally for years, I would meet people and I would say, oh, you have a really nice house. Do you know this guy Safra? Like, no, I don't know this guy. Like businessman in Switzerland. How would I know him? I don't know. I'm just, my friend Keith Johnson says, you throw stuff at the wall and you see what sticks. So then out of the blue in 2019, I get an email inviting me to go examine this codex in Geneva, Switzerland.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I go there. I fly to Switzerland. We spend several days, and I end up doing a bunch of tests and examinations on it. Then it sold. What was it? Last year or 2 years ago? I don't remember. 2023, I want to say. Yeah, in 2023 it sold. Yeah, it's Sotheby's actually. It sold.
Brother, you got to actually examine it before it went up to auction at Sotheby's.
Yeah.
Yeah. Were you able to photograph the whole thing?
Well, I have photographs of the whole thing that I was given by the previous owner and given permission to publish. And those photographs are online at ihbmr.com at the Institute for Hebrew Bible Manuscript Research's website.
Now, Nehemia, what is the significance of the discovery of this? Now, this leads into another question. Am I correct that the official Tanakh for Israel is the Jerusalem crown? Do I have the right?
So, what do you mean by official?
Well, in other
words, what makes it official? I mean, generally in publishing, if you say something's official, that's what makes it official. That's kind of a marketing term. So let me explain this, and this is a bit complicated. I'll try to explain this kind of in a layman's term, if possible. I don't know. Not sure I'm capable of it, but I'll give it a try. So there is an inscription from around the year 1050 from the Aleppo Codex, which is considered by scholars to be the most accurate representation of what's called the Masoretic text. The word Masorah means transmission, and so roughly Masoretic text is like what Christians might call Textus Receptus. Meaning, if you asked a Jew in the year 1200 or 1300, what does it say in the Bible? I want to know the exact letters and the exact vowels. What does it say in the Bible? They would say, well, the version that we consider to be the received text, the Masoretic text, is the great manuscript of Aaron ben Asher. Today we call that the Aleppo Codex. The importance of the Sassoon Codex is that from the time the Aleppo Codex became famous, when that is a bit of a question. Let's leave that for a different discussion. But sometime around the 10th or 11th century, certainly by the year 1050, that's the case, that in Jerusalem, there are people who are going to Jerusalem to check their Bibles against the Aleppo Codex, or at least check specific points in the Bible and say, I want to know if my Bible's accurate. Let me see what's in the Aleppo Codex. Yes. They didn't call it that at the time. They called it the great codex or manuscript of Ben Asher. All right. So from that time, people start saying, oh, wait, my manuscript is wrong. Let me correct it according to the Aleppo Codex. And what they end up doing is sort of homogenizing all the Bibles to match the Aleppo Codex, believing the Aleppo Codex is the original Bible that Moses wrote or that Ezra copied, right? Which maybe is correct, maybe isn't. The importance of the Sassoon Codex is the original version of it was copied before that process was finalized, let's say. And so we might have differences between the Aleppo Codex and the Sassoon Codex that go back to a time that either predate the Sassoon Codex possibly, or from the same period that predate the Aleppo Codex, or are from the same period as the Aleppo Codex. So I'll give you an analogy in Christianity. In the Catholic world, you have the Pope, and the Pope is the head of the church. Well, if you went back to the year 1050, right? So in 1053, I want to say, or 1052 is the split between the Greek Orthodox and the Catholics. If you went back to the year 1050, and you asked the Christians in Antioch who's the head of the church, they would say, well, the head of the church here is the Archbishop of Antioch, or the Bishop of Antioch. What about the Pope? Well, he's just the Bishop of Rome. Right? So in other words, I don't know that there was even a concept. Certainly if you went to the year 300 or 500, let's call it 500. If you went to the year 500 and you said, who's the head of the church? They would say, well, the head of the church in Constantinople is so-and-so, and the head of the church in Alexandria is this other person, and the head of the church in the Rome is this other guy. Well, isn't he the Pope? Yeah, he's the Pope of Rome. He's the Bishop of Rome. So the Aleppo Codex, in a sense, and I want to, we say in Hebrew, lahavdil elef havdei havdalot, to separate 1,000 separations, right? But the analogy here is that the Aleppo Codex became effectively the official Bible. which maybe
Now,
maybe should be, maybe shouldn't be. That's a separate discussion. The Sassoon Codex was copied before the Aleppo Codex, or at least at the time when certainly I would say at the time or before the Aleppo Codex was the official Bible, and so it has echoes of another official Bible. Let's put it that way.
now
And
does the Aleppo Codex, is it missing some of the pages?
it is missing some pages. So is the Aleppo. Both the Aleppo and the Sassoon are missing some pages. Thankfully, they're mostly not the same pages. Meaning there are many pages of the Sassoon that are missing in the Aleppo.
Oh, well, if you were just to
That's
take the
important.
Sassoon and the Aleppo
Yeah.
and reconcile them, would you have all the complete pages of the Tanakh?
Not all, you'd have most.
Now, what about
You'd
the
still be missing
Leningrad?
some pages. So Leningrad is complete from beginning to end.
Okay.
Leningrad is the basis of most modern printings of the Bible, and that's because it's complete. Leningrad is kind of a Johnny-come-lately in a sense. It's from it was completed around the year 1008. Compare that to the Aleppo Codex, which is completed around the year 925. And you say, well, that's 80 years. What's the big deal? It's an important 80 years. During those 80 years, the Aleppo Codex effectively becomes the official Bible. And the scribe of the Leningrad Codex claims that he relied on the Aleppo Codex, right? Or he relied on the work of Aaron ben Asher, right? Okay. So in other words, the Leningrad Codex is sort of near the end of the process, not exactly, but it's nearer the end of the process. Whereas the Aleppo Codex and the Sassoon Codex, they're at closer to the let's say when the process is in full swing. And the point is, if I take a Bible from today and I say, oh, it's the same as the Aleppo Codex, well, no duh, Sherlock. Of course it is. It's based indirectly on the Aleppo Codex. What I, as a scholar, want to do, I want to get back as close as possible to the earlier manuscripts before the process was crystallized. That's. I know that sounds a bit complicated. And look, you have to understand we're splitting hair. I, as a scholar, am splitting hairs over the minutia that the average person would look at these three Bibles, the Leningrad, Aleppo, and Sassoon, and would say, but they're all the same, right? We don't have a Bible where Ishmael was bound to the altar rather than Isaac, right? We don't have a Bible where God chose Esau instead of Jacob. That's not the kind of difference we're talking about, right? We're talking about is a certain word spelled one way or another way, even though it doesn't change the meaning. That's what we're talking about.
Okay, so with these three codexes, the Aleppo, Leningrad, and Sassoon, is that what is produced the Jerusalem crown? What is the Jerusalem crown? For those who know, the Jerusalem
crown was a so there was a scholar named Rabbi Mordechai Breuer, who was one of the great scholars of the study of the Hebrew text of the Bible. And what he said is, yes, we have 6 or maybe 7 manuscripts. That's what he really had access to at the time. And maybe it's 8, right? He found another one later. He has less than 10 manuscripts, and they have slight differences. He says, but the differences aren't that big. And when you compare all the manuscripts, even if there are slight differences in a particular place, when you compare them across all the manuscripts, they represent a uniform text. That was his argument. And so he said, all right, I need to reconstruct what that uniform text is in the places the Aleppo Codex is missing. And about a third of the Aleppo Codex is missing. And when it was missing, he used the Leningrad and the Sassoon Codex. He was one of the few scholars who had access to the Sassoon Codex, to the black and white photos from the 1950s. There were really 6 main manuscripts he used, and you could add 2 more later, right? But 6 were initially used. He had Aleppo, Leningrad, Sassoon, something called the Damascus Crown, also known as Sassoon 507. Sassoon 507 was also part of this Jewish merchant Sassoon's collection. He had Oriental 4445 in the British Library. And the 6th one he had was, the Cairo Codex of the Prophets, which he believed was... What's that?
I knew I was missing something. The Damascus Crown.
So those are what you could call, based on his early research, the Big 6. Later, he added another manuscript by the same scribe as the Leningrad Codex that is in a that was stolen, and it's currently in a private collection in New York. Officially, we don't know where it is, but I believe it's in New York somewhere. Right, and then there's another one in Cambridge University that he would use for certain portions because in any event. So he has less than 10 manuscripts, and he's reconstructing what the original Masoretic text was. In other words, if you asked Aaron Ben Asher, what is the exact dot in this exact word, right? And the dots are vowels and other things. Then Aaron Ben Asher would have told you that it's, or let's say what Rabbi Mordechai Breuer was doing is reconstructing what was the Bible of Aaron Ben Asher based on the Aleppo Codex and the missing portions of the Aleppo Codex, using other manuscripts and using notes. There were proofreader notes called Masoretic notes in these manuscripts. And based on that, he said, yes, there's differences, but those are mistakes. We can correct the mistakes by comparing all the manuscripts and finding the common denominator between them. So
can we call the Jerusalem Crown the unified text?
It's the reconstructed Masoretic text of the Ben Asher tradition. That's what you could say. Really, well, wait a minute. Then Rabbi Breuer died, and his student, who is my professor when I did my PhD, Professor Yosef Ofer, took the process one step forward, and he said, okay, Rabbi Breuer printed this Bible. Let's turn that into a digital text that we can then print as a book. And that took years of checking every dot and dash. And he once explained how he had research assistants who would sit there for 8 hours and not find a single mistake. And so the Jerusalem Crown is a printed edition of the Bible, a modern printed edition from the 21st century that is as close as we currently have to the Masoretic text of Aaron Ben Asher. Let's put it that way.
Well, let me ask you the $1 million question. The Apostle Paul Shaul, correct me if I'm wrong my pronunciation, he said, what advantage is there to being a Jew? He said, much in every way. To them, we're committed being the keepers of the oracles of God. Mm-hmm. So I believe you've done a good job. Would you say that you have the Bible, the Tanakh?
Me being the Jews or me being Nehemia Gordon? I would say yes, the Jews preserve the Hebrew text of Scripture. That's beyond doubt, right?
We have it. Right?
And what we're talking about, what I spend most of my hours of most days on, is the minutia around the edges of small details. And let me explain why the small details are so important. And I could give both a theological reason and a historical reason. And I think it's important to distinguish between the two, because as a scholar, the theological reason is, that's not important, right? But as a person of faith, it is important. So the theological reason is I believe that God wrote this book, and it was preserved and transmitted by Jewish scribes, and what they preserved and transmitted, I believe there's divine intervention there. Although the story is much more complicated than I thought it was maybe 10 years ago, which is that it's not, in other words, if I ask the question, which of these was written down by Baruch ben Neriah, the scribe of Jeremiah, I don't know the answer to that, because sometimes there's 2 or 3 different Jewish traditions about what was written down. And I believe one of those is what Baruch ben Neriah wrote. I don't know which one necessarily, though. And maybe it's none of those. But again, we're talking about the difference of, think about this. Here's an analogy in English. Is the word color spelled with a U or without a U? Right? So in British English, they spell it with a U. In American English, they spell it with a U. Jews obsess about that. And here's another famous example. The poet Shakespeare, or the playwright Shakespeare, wrote his own name something like a dozen different ways. Why did he do that? Because there was no fixed spelling. So that's what we're talking about in the Hebrew text of Scripture. There's no fixed spelling. And because of that, we say the word Sukkot is spelled this way in this verse and that way in this other verse, and we want to reproduce it perfectly. And if we have differences between the manuscripts, I want to document what those differences are. And a lot of people want to know what those differences are. Now, from the historical perspective, here's another question. There are Jews who are saying, already in the Second Temple period, there are Jews who are saying the fact that the word color is spelled with a U in this verse and again, this is an analogy, right? The fact that the word color is spelled this special way in this verse tells us a secret, deep message that you are very important to God. And that's why the word color is, no matter what color you are, you're important to God. And then look, that's just an analogy I made up. Here's the actual example. There are 3 verses in Numbers 28 and 29 that have aberrant spellings. And in one particular word, there's what the rabbis consider to be an extra mem, another verse that has an extra yud, and another verse an extra mem. And together, those 3 letters spell the word mayim, water. And the rabbis in the Second Temple period believed there was supposed to be a water libation in the temple, something the Torah never commands, a water libation. Right? There's like libations are when you take a jug or some kind of container of wine and you pour it out in front of the altar, or on the altar. So the rabbis institute a water libation based on 3 words with aberrant spellings in Numbers 28. I believe it's Numbers 28 and 29. Maybe it's in Leviticus 23. I could be remembering it wrong. What that tells you is there were some Jews in the Second Temple period who believed that their text of Scripture was fixed down to the very letter. And they had traditions that in this particular verse, this particular word is spelled with a U, and in this other verse, it's not spelled with the U. And that tells you no matter what color you are, you're important to God, right? In this case, we have a water libation, right, is the actual example. So, wow. So we have a fixed text already in Second Temple period. What is that fixed text? Is it the same as the Aleppo Codex and the text reconstructed of Aaron Ben Asher, or is it slightly different? That's the $64,000 I spent. It's a question that I spend all of my days agonizing over and trying to determine and figure out. And then there's a deeper question. What is the text that Baruch Ben Neriah wrote? That's already beyond the scope of what I'm able to do as a scholar. But I can get very, very close to that text. Let's put it that way. I think we
can agree that God, Yehovah, preserves his word.
That's a theological statement that I'm happy to acknowledge and agree with. But as a scholar, I can't deal with that statement. Let's put it that way.
Here's the deal. If we're going to be held accountable for knowing the word of God,
yes,
we did not have it, then we could all give the excuse, well, look, you can't judge me for your word because we didn't have it.
No, but I have a different answer for that. And this is entirely a theological position, meaning not theological. This is entirely let's call it a religious position, meaning here is me as a man of faith. And now let's open up our Bible. So we have Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 12. I'm going to start in verse 11. And so this is God speaking. This is no longer me speaking. It says, and I guess it's Moses speaking the word of God here. He says in verse 11, for the commandment, I'm translating here from the Hebrew. Am I able to share the screen? Is that an option here?
Oh, yes. Here's what you do.
How do we do that?
I want you to, thanks for reminding me. I want you to hit present at the bottom of the screen.
Okay, hold on a second. Let me.
Take your time. You're going to look for present.
Oh, there it is.
Okay, now what I want you to do.
Share screen. I got it.
Try share screen. Let's see if that works.
Oh, no, it's trying to do 2 monitors, but I only actually have 1 monitor. So let me make sure
I have a couple options. You can share whole screen or share monitor. Look at your options.
Okay, hold on a second. Show on one.
Take your time.
Well, I have my laptop plugged in. And now I don't have a computer working. Well, that's not good.
I still see you.
Okay, yeah, but I don't. Okay, my screen went blank from. Oh no, now it's working. Okay, you can see me. All right.
Yes,
beautiful.
sir. Do you want me to pull the text of the Bible up on the screen?
I've
got one.
Let's throw it up on the screen. Yeah, if you could, it's probably the way we work since I'm having trouble.
Let me get us here. Where do you want to go on the Bible?
So we want to go to Deuteronomy, chapter 30, verse 11, verses 11 through 14.
Okay. I brought this along because I'm going to ask you later a few questions. I wanted to pull the word up so we'd have it. Okay, hang on a minute. Numbers Deuteronomy is coming next. Okay, which chapter? So
it's chapter 30, verses 11 through 14.
Okay, hang on.
So it says, for this commandment that I command you today, the I here is Moses. Lo nifleti mimcha. It is not too difficult for you. Velo chukahi, and it is not far away from you. That's Deuteronomy 30, verse 11. And then here's a very famous 3 words in the Hebrew. Lo v'shamayim hi. It is not in heaven. Lemo mi alenu hashamayma v'kacheha lanu v'yishme'enu otah v'na'asena. It is not in heaven saying, who shall go up for us to heaven and take it for us, that he may cause us to hear it, and we will do it. And it says in verse 13, V'lo me'ever layam hi. It is not across the sea. Lemo mi avo lanu el ever hayam v'yikacheha lanu v'yashmi'enu otah v'na'asena. Saying, who will go for us across the sea and take it for us and cause us to hear it, and we will do it. Ki karov elecha davar ma'od. For the matter is very close to you. Beficha u'bilvavcha la'asoto. It is in your mouth and it is in your heart to do it. So that's Deuteronomy 30, verses 11 to 14. And what does that mean? What it means is, in the time of Moses, let's just say that Moses wrote the copy of the Torah, and there's only a single copy of the Torah. Yeah. And because they didn't have printing, right? So you literally have to write it out by hand. And someone were to take that Torah and bring it to Athens, and the Israelites would say, we don't have the Torah, it's over the sea in Athens. Okay, do whatever. You're bound. God holds you accountable for what you know and what you're able to do. Now, if somebody brings back the Torah to us from some other place, great, we'll do what we have access to. And we actually see an example of this in the story of King Josiah. Josiah was this young boy king, and he wants, it's my favorite story in the Bible, the story of King Josiah, or Yoshiyahu in Hebrew. King Josiah is one of the last kings of Judah. And around 621 BCE, he has ordered the temple to be renovated, the temple in Jerusalem. And in the temple in Jerusalem, they find a scroll that had just been sitting there and wasn't being read and nobody paid attention to. Yeah. They bring it to King Josiah and they read it to him, and he rips his garment, which is what you do when someone dies. When someone dies, you rip your garment. And why does he do that? Because he just heard the Torah read to him for the first time, and he realizes we have been sinning and we are going to be punished by God.
Wow.
And what were the sins? Well, we're told 3 main things were the sins that he was especially concerned with. There was an annual ceremony of reiterating the covenant, of remembering that we have this covenant with God and proclaiming this covenant and recommitting to the covenant. And that was the Passover sacrifice. So that is the Passover sacrifice was the annual recommitment to the covenant. And they hadn't been doing that. Or if they were doing it, they weren't doing it in Jerusalem, right? Meaning there were people who were doing it like on top of every hill and under every leafy tree, as Jeremiah says. The second thing is they were worshiping God, Yehovah, the true God, the God of Israel. They were worshiping through statues. They were worshiping through idols. And they were worshiping other gods along with that, right? So they had God and they had his wife, Asherah. Why did they have his wife? Because the Canaanite god had a wife. So they attributed to God what the Canaanite gods had. So they realized we're not supposed to worship idols, whether it's Yehovah or some other god. Number 3, the third sin that he becomes aware of, and he tears his clothes over, is we're only supposed to bring sacrifices to Yehovah in Jerusalem at the temple and nowhere else. And he goes around the country destroying what are called the high places. Oh, yes. And then, so those are the 3 big things that he embraces and that he was unaware of. And so Josiah didn't know what was in the Torah until it was read to him. And so he was bound by what he knew. Now, there are certain things you're bound by, even if you don't have the Torah, because they should be obvious. Even if you don't have the Torah, you know you're not supposed to murder people. Everybody intuitively knows that. And if they think you're supposed to murder people, it's because somebody convinced them of that, or they convinced themselves of that. Right? There are certain things, in the U.S. Constitution, they call this the law of nature and nature's God. Most people have no idea what that means. I'll tell you what I understand. Maybe I'm wrong. But we have this idea in medieval Judaism, and the idea is that if we sat down as rational thinking human beings and said, we want to make us, we don't know anything about God. We want to make a society that functions and which is a civil society where we can all live together in civility. And it's not just the strongest just kills and murders the other person. we would come up with certain rules and laws. And those are, some people will call those the ethical or the moral laws. Some of them are not obvious. I'll give you an example of something that's obvious and something that's not obvious. So an obvious one that everybody in every society will come up with is don't murder. Doesn't mean don't kill. There are certain situations where you should kill. Where if somebody is coming to murder you or murder your family, you defend yourself. Right? But you shouldn't murder. You shouldn't steal. Right? Those are universal laws that are the law of nature and nature's God in the words of the U.S. Constitution, or what they call mitzvot sichliot in medieval Judaism, which sichliot, mitzvot are commandments, and sichliot are rational commandments. So there are two kinds of commandments in the Torah, as Jews have seen it in Jewish philosophy. Rational commandments are things that we would figure out on our own. And those we figure out because our ancestor ate of the fruit of knowledge of good and evil. And so we're expected to know you shouldn't murder. Now, there's people around the world who think, oh, it's good to murder, right? There are entire religions that they think it's good to murder, that it's incumbent upon them from their God to murder, especially innocent. There is an account of one of the hostages who was taken on October 7th. And for the first 50 days, he thought his wife and children were alive. And he later said, it's good I didn't know that they were dead because I wouldn't have made it through those 50 days.
Yeah.
Later, he was told by these murderous barbarians who kidnapped him,
right?
Oh, we killed your wife and children because we were told we already have too many hostages. Only take men. Kill all the women and children. So there are people who believe it's a mitzvah, who it's incumbent upon them from their God to kill. That is a perversion of any true religion, but that's what some people believe. That is particularly incumbent upon them to kill innocent women and children, civilians, when they're not defending themselves. So, but every society would have ultimately come up with these principles that you should not kill, you should not murder. Now, what are and those are things that we would know intuitively if we just think about it and discuss it amongst ourselves as rational human beings. Those are the law of nature and nature's God, or the mitzvot sichliot in Jewish terms, the rational commandments. There's also Torah commandments. And Torah commandments are commandments we would never figure out in a million years unless God told us. And
what you're saying,
what's that?
Basically, the heed that has been given much is required.
Absolutely. Or as God says in Leviticus, he says, I will be sanctified through those who are close to me. Right? When he burns up the sons of Aaron, they're like, what's going on here? He said, those are the people, the two sons of Aaron were the ones who were supposed to go into the tabernacle and represent the whole people before God. And so there's a much higher standard expected of those who represent God. And I believe that God chose Israel to be a light unto the nations, not because Israel's special or holy in some way inherently, but because God said, all right, I need some representatives for the whole world to look at, and you'll be a good example or a bad example. A good example is if you obey me, the world will see this is what happens when you obey me. If you disobey me, the world will see this is what happens when you disobey God. Right? So it's not such a great thing to be or it's not such a desirable thing. You know, all of the great prophets of Israel said, choose somebody else. And there is this story the rabbis tell, which they just made up, that God offered the Torah to all the nations. And unlike Moses, who said, choose somebody else, and Jeremiah, who said, choose somebody else, Israel said, oh, I accept that. Choose me. I don't. That's not a story that's in the Tanakh. That's a made-up story. Israel was chosen despite themselves, not because of themselves.
Well, that was a good answer. If you're just joining me, we're with Dr. Nehemia Gordon. Nehemia, am I correct that you are fluent in English, Hebrew, but you also speak Greek, some Greek and Aramaic?
I don't speak Greek, but I read ancient Greek and Aramaic. I'm much better at Aramaic than I am at Greek. And a little bit of Arabic. I'm quite good at ancient Phoenician, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, but there's not a large vocabulary in those, so it's kind of easy if you know Hebrew.
Okay, so here's the question. What does Dr. Nehemia Gordon use as his study Bible? Now, do you prefer to read right out of the Hebrew, or do you read in English?
I definitely read out of the Hebrew, and I'll look at different English translations, but I definitely prefer to read it out of the Hebrew. There's an old saying that every translator is a traitor, and it sounds better in the original Italian. It's an Italian expression.
Which of the codexes do you prefer to read from?
So I will read from a modern digital edition, which is based on the Leningrad Codex. And then I will, at various opportunities, will compare it to the various manuscripts.
Okay.
Rarely do I find a significant difference, but I'll tell you where I do find a significant difference. Before I get to that, I know you want to move into this question. I just want to finish up the thing about how there's rational commandments and there's Torah commandments. So the Torah commandments are commandments we wouldn't come up with on our own. And it's not intuitive, at least from a Jewish perspective, what those are. So one intuitive one is God says, don't eat pig. Why don't eat pig? Because God said so. Is there some rational reason? Maybe, but God didn't tell us what that is. So we're supplying the rational reason, and we have to be very careful, because what people do in Judaism, they've done this. They said, oh, we were told not to eat pig because it has parasites. If I heat it to a high enough temperature, I can then eat pig. And now what you've done is you've done away, it says in Deuteronomy 4:2 and 12:32, don't add and don't take away from all the commandments. And you've now taken away from one of the commandments. So from my perspective, okay. So we have to be very careful to provide the reason when God didn't tell or even hint at what the reason is, because then we might end up undoing the commandments. So among those rational commandments, look, in Christianity, historically, there was it's interesting. Some Christians will say that the law was done away with and they're not subject to the laws of God. But then other Christians have like over 1,000 rules. Like you can't let your hair grow long is one of the rules in some Christian denominations. You can't drink alcohol in some Christian denominations. One of them in medieval Christianity is you can't marry your first cousin. Jews have historically married their first cousin. And I'm not judging it one way or another. I'm just saying that there you have a moral principle. You say, well, it's disgusting. Well, who decides it's disgusting? The Torah didn't say it was disgusting, and Jews historically did it. Now, you could say there are rational reasons not to do it because of birth defects, right? But that is not an ethical decision, right? That's not a Torah decision. Let's put it that way. So there is an example of a Torah commandment that the Torah doesn't say that. There's a long list of people you can't marry, right? You can't marry your aunt, right? There's a lot. You can't marry your daughter-in-law, whether it's your physical son or your adopted son. It's an abomination according to the Torah to marry your daughter. Right. Okay, the Torah says it doesn't say anything about first cousin, right? So those are Torah commandments. We would never know those, or we would come to different conclusions if we just tried to figure those out themselves. And those we're not bound to if we don't know. We're not subject to those if we don't know about them. God's not going to hold us accountable for marrying our first cousin or for marrying my aunt if I didn't know any better. And that's why God comes to educate us and tell us, hey, here are these commandments I want you to follow. Why? Because I say so, right? All right. So now let's go back to the other question you asked, which I forget what it was. Yeah.
Well,
which Bible do I use? So I try to read it, I do read it from the Hebrew, and then I try to look at different manuscripts when I see something suspicious in particular, and then I'll look at different English translations. I haven't found any English translation that always gets it right, and sometimes, in fact, quite often on a daily basis, I'll see translations in English that are not translations of the Hebrew text. They're translation of either a made-up text, meaning they read the same Hebrew I did, and they said that doesn't make sense to us. Let's change the text, and they're actually changing the Hebrew text, or it'll be based on the Greek or some other translation in English.
That's actually a great point you brought up to lead me into my next question. I'm going to throw the scripture up here on the screen.
Yeah.
So we can look at it. Hang on a minute. Tell me, Nehemia, if you can see this. Is it big enough?
Hold on. I got to turn the air conditioning down here because I'm hot. Yes, I can see it. Chapter 15.
Okay. Now, I'm in Genesis chapter 15. I'm going to ask you some short questions. Okay, Genesis 15. Here's the first question.
I'll do my best to give a short answer.
It says, after these things, the word of the Lord came unto Abram in a vision, saying, fear not, Abram, I am thy shield and thy exceeding great reward. Okay. Mm-hmm. So let me tell you about a project I'm working on. Mm-hmm. I'm doing it for myself. In the old days, if you wanted a copy of the Bible, the Tanakh, you had to hire someone, a scribe, right, to do it. And I think kings were required to copy it themselves. Is that true? Okay.
That's in Deuteronomy. It says that one of the obligations of a king is to make a copy of the Torah. Yeah.
So let me tell you something I'm doing, and you can be my sanity check if I'm off the rails or what. Okay. I've taken a Cambridge King James version of the Bible. Uh-huh. It's I've got the Word document up here on the screen from Genesis.
What does it mean that it's Cambridge? I'm not familiar with.
Well, so it's it's the official King James that's printed by Cambridge to this date.
Okay.
It's the KJV, King James Version, Authorized Version, 1769.
Oh, okay.
So it's the only Bible that I understand in the English language that's not copyrighted outside of England. So if you try to take one of the other English versions and copy more than a paragraph or a page, you got to get permission. But not so for the King James, it's unbound. But that being said, what I want to do is 2005. Let me get back on the main screen here for a second. 2005, I prayed to God. And I said, God, I'm just totally confused here. And I know you're not the author of confusion. We got people out there saying God's name is Yahweh. We've got people out there saying we don't know what it is. We just have the tetragrammaton. They were saying YHWH, YHVH. We had some people that were writing G_D. And that's as far as they'd gotten. They wouldn't even write anymore. They thought it was profane to put the O in there. And I said, God, I'm confused here. What is your name?
Okay.
Shouldn't I be able to know that? And fast forward a few years down the road, I met you. And I learned about your research, and you found the divine name of Yehovah. And I'm forever grateful to the work that you've done. And I believe there's others that feel the same way like me. But when I found out the name Yehovah, I said, there's no turning back for me. So I'm very angry, Nehemia, that today, about any English Bible, they're going to put in here capital L-O-R-D. So my understanding is every time we run across capital L-O-R-D, that's a placeholder in the English for Yehovah. Am I correct so far?
Usually. We'll talk about the exceptions to the rule in a minute, but go ahead.
When I see L-O-R-D, I know that is just a placeholder. So as I'm reading the Bible, I will read, after these things, the word of Yehovah came unto Abram. Now, here's what I want to ask you. My first question, verse 15 says, and Abram said, Lord God. Now, I've run into a couple situations where there's capital G-O-D. Is that synonymous with capital L-O-R-D? Should I put in Yehovah here?
Yes. So here it's Adonai Yehovah.
Okay.
In the Hebrew.
So the word Adonai, that equals Lord, capital L, lowercase O-R-D?
Yes. Right. I mean, Adonai literally means my great Lord or my great lords, but either my lords or my great Lord.
So look at what I'm going to do here.
Lord is Adonai. So my great Lord Yehovah is really how it would be a literal translation of verse 2 of Lord God.
You're looking at a King James authorized version, as they call it.
Yeah.
I'm taking my King James for my own purposes. I'm wanting to go in, and my bucket list is I want to create a King James with the divine name of Yehovah restored into the word. Because I think it's an abomination to know his name, and we keep using capital L-O-R-D. So if I were to come here and I would read down here in verse 4, and behold, the word of the Lord, I would put Yehovah in here. Now that's what I'm doing. Let me ask you a question. Should the name of Yehovah be in all caps, or should it be capital Y and then lowercase E-H-O-V-H?
Oh, I mean, that's kind of a personal decision because Hebrew doesn't have capital letters.
So look here. I will go down here, and he believed in the Lord. He believed in Yehovah. Now, this is what I'm proceeding to do. Now, let me show you something else I want to show you. Okay. Yeah. I want to title this Precise Translation. Now, people have thrown the King James Bible under the bus, Nehemia, because they say it's got all those archaic thee, thy, thou, ye. But tell me if I'm correct in what I'm saying here. Those pronouns are very significant because what we're talking about here is we're talking about a translation from the Hebrew Tanakh into English, for example, that I speak. And we need to have a precise translation so we can know who the audience is. And that's very important. Let me take you down to Genesis 3:1 and just shoot this by you for a moment.
Okay.
Genesis 3:1 says, now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. Now, once again, I believe this should be Yehovah here.
Okay. That's what it is in the
And
Hebrew.
Okay. Now, that's my goal, was to get a Hebrew to English translation with the name back in. And
Okay.
he said unto the woman, yea, speaking of the serpent, hath God said, ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden? Now, my understanding, Nehemia, is in the King James, where you see thee, thy, thou, and thine. That's a singular. When you see ye, it's plural. Now, if you look in the other English translations other than the King James, most of them will just say you. But now we don't know, is it a singular or a plural? And if we want to get a precise translation from Hebrew to English, we need to know that, right?
So you're asking an English question. So let's back up. So Hebrew has 4 ways of expressing you. It's you singular masculine, you feminine singular feminine, feminine singular, you masculine plural, you feminine plural. Modern English only has you, except in some dialects we actually do distinguish between the singular and the plural, and the plural would be y'all. And where I come from, I'm a northerner. I came from I was raised in Chicago, and there we say you guys. Right?
Or
so
Uint?
I'm not familiar with that.
Down south, y'all. Hey, y'all.
Y'all, but then y'all could be also to a singular person in some parts of the south, and then they'll say all y'all, right? So the point is, in for example, Spanish, of which I know very little, you have, right? Don't you have two in ustedes or something?
Yes, two and usted. Yes.
Right. So you have, but then they have the familiar question, which we don't have in ancient Hebrew. So the point is that it would be more precise to distinguish between you singular and you plural. If you really want it to be in modern English, you should change it to you all, to y'all, which would be, and thou shalt speak unto him would be, and you shall speak unto him. But then when it says ye, it should be y'all, right? In other words, what you're really saying is in Genesis 3:1, he says lo tochlu, which is y'all, you plural, shall not eat.
Do you have Tanakh with you?
I mean, I'm looking at the Hebrew text here on my screen.
Can you turn to Exodus 4:15, chapter 4, verse 15? Because this may be I may be able to explain my point better, and we're going to find out if this is important or not, because what matters to me is what's in the Hebrew. Now, at this juncture, I don't speak or read Hebrew. That's my goal is before I die, I'd like to learn enough that I could read the Leningrad, at least enough to take a look. Okay, so let me read it to you in the English, King James. I'm reading from Exodus 4, verse 15. And thou shalt speak unto him, and put words in his mouth, and I will be with thy mouth, and with his mouth, and will teach you what ye shall do. Now, by what I've said, that thee, thy, thou, thine is singular, and when you see ye and you, it's plural in the King James, and that's important. Where I saw it says, and thou, he was talking to, I believe, Moses, and you'll put words in his mouth, Aaron's mouth, and I will be with thy mouth. He's talking specifically to Moses here, and with his mouth, those are singular, and will teach you what ye shall do. So you and ye, by what I'm telling you, would be for the whole congregation of Israel. Now, that's my understanding. What's it say to you in Hebrew?
So here, I think I figured out now how to share the screen, if you'll allow me here.
Okay, yes.
So I do present, and then I do share screen.
Share screen? Yes, sir.
Oh, it still wants to share 2 monitors, so let me see if it worked. Did it work?
Not yet. You're going to have to...
select window on screen, so it won't let me share the whole screen. Yeah. That's okay. All right.
Select the window. Okay, here you go.
Here. All right.
Yes.
This is Exodus 4:15 in my Bible software Accordance, and this is based on the Leningrad Codex.
Okay.
So it's vidibarta, and you singular will speak. Visamta, and you will place. So it says, and you will speak to him. You singular will speak to him, and you singular. And by the way, it's not just singular; it's masculine singular. If he
That's
were
his
to
point.
say masculine or feminine singular, it would be a different form of the word.
Okay.
So you will speak the words you singular, masculine singular in his mouth, or you
Okay.
will place the words in his mouth, and I will be with your mouth, your masculine singular, and with his
Yes.
mouth, and I will instruct. Etchem is plural, masculine plural.
Plural.
Et asher ta'asun, and ta'asun is also masculine plural. And I will
Yes.
instruct all y'all that which all y'all shall do. Right? That's
Okay.
so the Hebrew is very specific in distinguishing between 4 different types of you.
Okay. Now that's perfect match, because if you had read this in almost any other English version,
Mm-hmm.
you wouldn't be able to distinguish that because they don't have the pronouns.
Okay.
And nobody ever explained it to me. Now that makes perfect sense because it sounds archaic. But the fact is that they didn't speak that language back then. They actually had to bring that into the King James translation, these pronouns, so they could get precise translation
In
from.
1611, when they translated the King James, they were no longer distinguishing between thou and you.
Yeah, that wasn't in normal conversation. So
Okay.
the reason they brought that in there is because they would not have a precise translation from Hebrew to English. You mentioned there's female and male, there's singular and plural. Well, the pronouns we have today don't allow for this, except maybe we use y'all and youans or you all. But because of the way the King James has those pronouns, that gives us an accurate, precise translation. You can't say the same for these other versions out there, and that's why I respect the King James, and it makes sense. Now there's some other words that would not be necessary to keep the older translation, but when it comes to pronouns, I think it's very important. Okay, I just wanted to run that by you. That makes sense to me.
Can we look at the next question? Oh, we got
Okay.
back here.
Fair enough. Yes, sir.
So you asked, is whenever it says Lord in caps or God in caps, is that Yehovah,
Yeah.
Yehovah in the Hebrew? And there's
Yes,
an
sir.
exception to the rule. So
Okay.
in 49 places in the, 49 places in the Tanakh, in the Old Testament, we have what's called, or what I call the poetic form of the name Yehovah, of God's name, which is Yah. And so show me in your translation, Exodus 15:2.
Okay.
To see what you have there.
Yes, sir. Folks, I'm excited to be here. We're with a real Bible teacher, scholar. That's why I know these kind of questions, we got to be asking the right person, or we're going to get a wrong answer. That's why we're deferring to.
Well, I'm sure if we talk for 2 or 3 hours, I'll get something wrong, but hopefully I'll correct it in the future.
15 verse 2. You want me to read it?
Okay. Or can you show it on the screen?
Oh, yes, sir. Okay. Exodus 15, chapter 2.
The Lord is my strength and song. It does not say in the Hebrew, Yehovah is my strength and song. It says, Yah is my strength and song.
Oh.
As in hallelujah. Right? So we know the word Yah from hallelujah, right?
Right.
Hallelujah is praise Yah. Yah is a shortened form of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, right? The name of God, Yehovah. And again, look, some people say Yahweh, and they have their reasons for saying that, or Yahweh in English, right? I believe it's Yehovah. I really don't want that to be something that divides people, because whether you say Yahweh or Yehovah, you're at least being more precise than saying Lord, right? And
Right.
Lord is very ambiguous, and perhaps intentionally so in some translations, right? There's actually a ruling put out by Pope Benedict XVI, in which he says it's good to use Lord and the equivalents in other languages, because it's intention. When we do that, we're being intentionally ambiguous. When we say Yehovah, it's too precise, and it limits our interpretation of Scripture. Basically, is what he says, which it should, because if you're being precise, your interpretation should be limited. Look, now turn to Exodus 17:16 for me.
Okay. Hey, before we go there, I just noticed verse 3. The Lord is a man of war. The Lord
There
is
it
his
is,
name.
Yehovah.
This should be Yehovah is a man of war. Yehovah is his name, right?
Yes.
Not Lord. Now, I'm going to move to that verse, but let's just
Here's
stay.
the point. Just in this passage, you have Lord representing two completely different things. One is Yah and one is Yehovah. And you might say, well, that's, who cares? It's the same thing. Well, my name is Nehemia. And if it was really important to your precise wording, look, my words aren't that important, neither are yours, but God's words are important. And if it's recorded in Scripture, if it was important enough for this to be transmitted by the scribes, we should want to know what they actually transmitted. And in verse 2, they transmitted Yah. And in verse 3, they have Yud-He-Vav-He twice, which is Yehovah. Like yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Nehemia, understand my problem. Mm-hmm. My problem is the best English translation I've got has got an acronym there, a placeholder at best.
Yeah.
And
well, it has we could call it a substitution.
Okay, right? It's a substitution. Now, if I wanted to catch that mistake, because I would have made a mistake here, needed to go back to the Hebrew, would I have been able to see?
So here would be the correct procedure, I believe, and I could be wrong in some places, but I think and here's something you can do with the search and replace. But before you did the search and replace, the first thing you would have to do is go to every one of the 49 instances of Yah, and you would have to swap it out with Yah, right? Every time it has Lord and you have Yah, you have to change it to Yah, and then you could do a search and replace. And you could actually do this in Word. We'll do it and then we'll undo it. I'll show you how to do it. So type, or do you see in the upper right there, you have find?
Yes, sir.
Click on that find and do it in the drop down. That's not the way you want to do it. You want to do the drop down.
Okay.
You have a little arrow pointing down there where it says find.
Oh, right.
Not there. In the upper right, there's a little arrow. I think this will work. It works.
Sure. There you go. Find.
So, yes. No. Go back to that. And where it says advanced find, do advanced find.
Okay.
Now click on replace.
Going to go to replace. Yes, sir.
Now type in there the Lord in all caps.
Like this?
I would do lowercase t.
Okay.
The Lord. And here's where it's complicated. If the verse begins, and now type in Yehovah.
Okay.
And we'll undo this. All right. Now click on more. No, not yet. Click on more.
More. Yes, sir.
And now do matched case.
Okay.
Now it's only going to replace the ones where Lord is in all caps. Now click replace all.
Okay. Replace all.
And it didn't work. Oh.
I think it's the lowercase. Well, I don't know.
The lowercase. So we have a different issue going on. Now close this little thing. You have to X out of this.
Okay.
I'm not sure. So if you go over Lord in all caps, by the way, you have here in the Hebrew Yahweh, which I'm sure is not what you intended.
I wanted to ask. I'm trying to get the Hebrew spelling of God's name. Is that it? That's not it.
That's not it. No.
Okay, I better take that out there.
All right. It's supposed to be Shvach Olam Kamatz, 3 different vowels.
Okay.
So I'll send it to you if you remind me.
Okay.
All right. So go to where you have Lord in caps.
Okay. You want me to go find the first one?
Yeah, it's in Genesis 3 somewhere. Or Genesis 2:4 is going to be the first one.
Okay, here's one. Yes,
all
sir.
Right. Anyone? So now highlight that.
Okay.
And now do just the word Lord, not the.
Okay.
Okay, so this is complicated how we're going to do this. So now go to where it says, I'm teaching you how to use Word. Where it says font, there's a little arrow pointing to the bottom right, where it says font at the top. You have to click on that.
Let's see.
No, to your left, that's paragraph. Now, no, to your left. Can I draw your a little down to the left? You have an arrow pointing down at 45 degrees.
Yep.
No,
is this it?
There. Nope, below that. No, above that. Yeah, not that, but the one to the left of that.
Okay.
Click on that. Click on that.
Yes, sir.
And you see it says small caps. So now undo small caps.
Okay.
You have to click it again. That's interesting. It's not all small caps. So what they did here is very complicated. So hit cancel here. Or hit OK. Hit OK.
Okay. Let me
do that again.
Small cap.
So what they did in this file, and this was here, now hit OK.
Okay.
All right. So now you see it's no longer small caps. So here's what they did, and this is like a typesetting thing, okay? The L is a normal L. Do Control Z, so that's undone. So you undo this.
Okay.
Yeah, undo that. So here's what they did. Whoever typed in this text, they have a normal capital L, but the ORD is not normal. The ORD is in something called small caps. So if
Yeah.
you do a search and replace, this is extremely complicated. I know how to do it, but it takes several steps.
We're going to search this on ORD, right?
What you're going to do, search and replace is ORD. But
Yep.
before you do that, you have to replace. Well, let's do that. Let's do replace.
What if I replace this with all caps, higher cap?
You could do that. Well, you can't search for something because it's mixed. That's the problem.
Oh,
So,
okay.
let's do this offline because the audience doesn't need to spend time on this. I'll walk you through it. It's like a 5-stage process. Go to Exodus 17:16. I want to see what they have for you. Actually, go to Isaiah 12, verse 2. Isaiah 12:2 in Hebrew has both Yah and Yehovah in the same verse.
I don't have my concordance here. Where am I going to find Isaiah? Forgive me.
Isaiah is, well, I don't know what order this is in. So in mine, Isaiah is going to be after Kings, but probably not here. It's going to be before Jeremiah, my guess. There we go.
Got it. What chapter?
Chapter 12, verse 2. Yeah, the English has a different order than Hebrew. So that's chapter 4, chapter 12, verse 2.
Chapter 12, verse 2. Yes, sir.
All
right
right.
here. Cool.
So it says, "Behold, God is my salvation." Oh, so here you have Jehovah in the English of the King James. How interesting.
That's a double. Yeah. Well, it's got it in 4 or 5 places, but that's all. So my question is,
I think it's
why
7. Yeah. So
Okay.
here's what it really says in Hebrew.
Okay.
It doesn't say, "For the Lord Yehovah is my strength and my song." It says, "For Yah Yehovah is my strength and my song."
Ah,
So the first Lord there, the Lord, is actually Yah.
okay.
By the way, now you have for the Yah. You want to get rid of the. And then the second one is Yehovah. And it has Jehovah because it's like, wait, we can't say Lord, Lord here because they're different. The first Lord is Yah and the second Lord is Yehovah. So they said for Lord Jehovah, which is kind of almost ridiculous. I'll tell you why it's ridiculous. Rabbinical Jews replaced Yud He Vav He Yehovah with Adonai because the rabbi had made a prohibition that you must not speak the name. If you do, you lose your portion in the world to come. Okay, according to the rabbis.
Yes.
There was never a prohibition to say Yah. That's something Christians invented or misunderstood, probably.
Right.
So if you read if an Orthodox Jew reads this in the synagogue, let's say, he will read Hine Eli Shuati Eftach Velo Efchad Ki Ozi V'Zimrat Yah, and then he'll say Adonai instead of Yehovah. But Yah he'll just read as Yah.
Now
So why replace Yah with Lord? It makes no sense to me. I don't understand that, to be honest with you.
So you saw the mistake I was making, just changing all capital O-R-D to Yehovah, because some of it is Yah. But
yeah. And there's 49 of those. So the first thing you need to do is identify those 49, replace them with Yah, and then you can go deal with the all caps problem, right?
Okay. Now,
let's look at one more because I don't actually know the answer. Or we'll look at 2 more if that's okay. Isaiah 38:11.
Okay.
So here I'm genuinely curious.
If I could read Hebrew, though, I would be able to see the difference in spelling between Yehovah and Yah.
Yeah, they're completely different. Let me show you. In fact, let me show you on the screen, okay? Rather than telling you, I think you probably have to stop sharing.
Yes, you hit share again.
And okay, so it makes me share the specific. Okay.
Oh, listen. Wow. I'm having a great time here learning.
All right. So hopefully you can see this. So here was Isaiah 12:2. Let me give a different text. It doesn't have those little notes in it. That's easier to look at. So here we have, that one has the notes too. I meant to do this one here. Okay, there we go. So here's your King James, at least in concordance. I don't know which version this is. I don't think it's 1769 per se. I don't know which it is, to be honest with you. All right. So here here is the word Yah. Okay, and that's that's Exodus 15:2. And then if we go to Exodus 12:2, or Isaiah 12:2, which is based on Exodus 15:2, right? It says Yah Yehovah, and you can see those words. This is 2-letter word Yah Yud He, and this is Yud He Vav He. You can see they look different.
Now,
my mouse over them, I get a little thing on the bottom left over here. Oh, I lost it. Hold on.
this is beautiful. What software are you using?
This is called Accordance. But I mean, you should be able to do the same thing with, like, I don't know. I don't really use this, so I have no idea if this is going to work. But Blue Letter Bible, I think, has some kind of thing like that, doesn't it? Where you can look
I don't know. They got Hebrew, but do they have the pointers?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Vowels and the pointers? What do you call them?
Nikud, yeah, the vowels.
So I need something with vowels in the Nikud, or it's worthless to me.
Hebrew Bible vowel. I mean, I'm literally Googling this. I have no idea how you would do it because I do it very different.
Yes. Well, I don't do it at all. That's why I need instruction here. What do you recommend I use for Bible?
Probably do this. Well, you want something where it lines up. Let's do Hebrew Bible. Somebody out there is like, Nehemia, I do this every day. I know how to do it, but I don't. So I just, here you go, Bible Hub, Interlinear Bible Hebrew. So hopefully this is correct. I have no idea. I can't vouch for it. But let's do Isaiah 12:2. And that didn't work. Somebody out there is like, Nehemia, don't you know how to use the interlinear? No, because that's not what I use. Okay, let's do interlinear verses. Okay, there we go. So here we have, now we just have to get to Isaiah 12, verse 2. Here we are. So here, Isaiah 12:2, and they have it exactly right. Well, I mean, they have Yahweh, but at least you know it. You can see here the letters, Yud He Vav He for Yehovah, and then here is Yah. Okay, now that we have this tool, can you see this? I actually don't know if you can see it.
I'm still on your.
Sorry. So they don't do it the same way. I usually use Zoom, and
you brought up a good point, Nehemia. Now listen. I already know that I need the vowel pointers, and I want a tool or a Bible or a Tanakh.
Okay, here I'm doing an entire screen. So can you see the interlinear here on BibleHub.com?
I got it now. Yes. Yes,
okay,
sir.
So this here, it says Yah, and this has Yehovah. Now, if I go over here, do you see accordance again?
Yes.
All right. So in accordance, we have 49 times it has Yah. Okay, and I could send you a file that has these 49. Okay. And then you look up those. And so here is going to be one. Here's an interesting one. So it's Psalm 68:5, and it says, B'yah Shemo, by his name Jah. Well, that's interesting. So there it's not Jehovah or, now if we go to Psalm 68:5, and this is in the Blue Letter Bible. Oh, and interlinear is the one you have to see. Oh, was that not Psalm? It's a different verse in English. Okay, it's one verse before, so it's 68:4 in English. Right, so that's a problem that English and Hebrew sometimes is different verse numbers. So it says on the clouds by Yah, right? And you can see that that's Yud He, and the Be here is a preposition that means by, right? So it's not Yehovah. You can see that, and there's 49 places in the Tanakh where it's Yah instead of Yehovah, but they'll have. Well, so the King James doesn't have Lord here. The King James has Jah. What does yours have in Psalm 68:5? Because there's different versions of the King James, right? That's the problem. Or 68:4, sorry. And yours is 68:4.
Well, if you get the King James, they're pretty consistent, unless you got the 16:11. Where you'd have a difference would be NIV, NASB. Okay, I'm in Psalms. Where do you want me to go?
Psalm 68:4 in the English.
68:4. Mm-hmm. I maintain that the best English we've ever had is the King James if we want to get accurate pronouns. But it's got some issues, as we know. It says capital
Every translation has issues. I say deal with it, right? I mean, it is what it is.
Well, I'm dealing with it. I'm going to put his name back in if he helps me. 68:14. Okay.
68:4.
4. Okay. A father of the fatherless and a judge of the widows is God in his holy habitation.
Okay, that's something close. Sing unto chapter 68, verse 4 of Psalms. Are you sharing it?
Oh, no, excuse me. No, it says Jah. I had the wrong verse. Yeah. J-A-H. Yeah, all King James will be the same unless it's a 16:11.
Okay. So somewhere they have the 1611 online. Now I'm really curious. I want to see it. It's University of Pennsylvania.
See, the difference between the 1611 and the later versions is just the typeset had to be fixed, and there were some spelling errors, and there was a couple older uses of words.
But I guess are they spelling errors or are they older uses, right? That's the question, right?
I mean,
I don't know the answer.
Basic English words that you can see the variance. Now, content's the same, but just some of the spelling has changed. But they fixed it all by 1789, and it's been, good for the next 300-400 years. But you can't say that about all the other modern versions.
So let's look at another verse. I hear what you're saying. Let's look at another verse, which is so let's look in the blue letter or whatever that was, the Bible Hub. They'll have it as well. So hold on, let me find this here. I had a window here that had all the yahs. I don't know what I did with it, so I have to redo the search.
So I need to be on the lookout for Yah and also Jah.
49 and Jehovah, we found out. We found out there are instances of Jehovah in your Bible. So you want to look for John, Jehovah, and fix those first. And then you'll go back after that, and you'll look for Lord in caps. And look, there'll be O Lord and the Lord and just Lord in some places, right? That's where it gets complicated. So, all right. So we have hallelujah, and we have that. Let's see how many times do we have that. So hallelujah, or various forms of that. There's also Yehalleluah. So we have that 27 out of the 49 times. So so Psalm 104:35. What do you have there?
Okay.
104:35.
Let me pull it up here. I'm just going to pull up another screen here. It's faster.
Yeah.
Psalm 104:35.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
It's a different verse. And okay, so this keeps happening. No, it should be verse 35. Yeah.
Okay. It says, "Let the sinners be consumed out of the earth, and let there be no more. Bless thou the Lord, O my soul, praise ye the Lord."
All right. So I'm going to show you on my computer here. So we do present.
Okay.
Learn how to share screen here.
So in Hebrew, praise ye the Lord means hallelujah.
It's hallelujah. So it has here. Can you see my screen here?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Oh, what happened? Let's get rid of these little letters here. 1 second. Yep. All right. So we have here Psalm 104:35. It says, "Bachi nafshi et Yehovah, Yehovah. May my soul bless Yehovah. Hallelujah. Praise Yah." Okay. So it doesn't say praise ye the Lord. That's not true. It says praise Yah. Why does it do that? Wait a minute. Here, I'm trying to go to this thing here. So, and here it is on Bible Hub. So Bible Hub has here Yehovah, which they translate as Yahweh.
Yep.
And here they have Yah. Now here's a trick you can do. I don't know if this works. I've never done this. But if we click on this little number, will it bring us every instance of Yah? It will. So there you have the 49, presumably. It has 48. So what's the one they're missing in the Strongs? I don't know. There's 2 occurrences of be Yah, by Yah, and 46 of just Yah by itself. And mine, based on the Leningrad Codex, has 49. Right, so you see here 49. So here's what we need to do to find out this is interesting. So we can actually make the concordance here. So I'll send you this document. Here are the 49, and you have to systematically compare this list with this list and figure out which one they're missing. My guess is the one there. Well, I don't know. There's one where it has Yah twice. Maybe that's the one in Isaiah. I want to say it's like 26. Let's see. Maybe they only count that once. Where's Isaiah in their book order? That's Psalms. Oh, they don't have the full list here. So we have to click on something to see the full list. Here we go.
Nehemia, some may think I'm being presumptuous. But let me tell you something. I believe it must be done. If no one else wants to do it, I'm going to do it myself. And here's the problem. There have been attempts to do this, and one guy just put the tetragrammaton in there. Well, that's not enough. Another one.
Why isn't that enough? I actually like that idea. Meaning if we have to educate people that this word Yehovah, right, is to be read that way. If you write it in Hebrew, then they'll know to read. So here's the reason that I think I'm okay with that. There were ancient Greek and Hebrew manuscripts that whenever the name appeared, they wrote Yud He Vav He. And in Hebrew manuscripts, they wrote it in ancient Hebrew letters.
Well, here's the problem, because you saw today King James had it right with the exception of the J a few places. Why weren't they consistent? So there's another guy that came in and took the King James, and at least for capital O-R-D, and I'm not sure he got the Yah right, he went in and put J-E-H-O-V-H. He spelled it with a J. Well, that's still not good. In my opinion, it's got to be with a Y. So the other problem is, apart from the King James and maybe one or two more, you got the issue of the missing pronouns. So my goal is to correct my King James, which has been sitting there for 400 years, and no one's done anything about it. And now we know the name of Yehovah. You know, he asked the question, what is my name? What is my son's name, if you can tell? The riddle, Proverbs 34. And, you know, he says many other places, I am Yehovah. That is my name.
Do you know how Jews interpret that verse in Proverbs 30?
What is your take on that? Proverbs 34.
So the standard Jewish interpretation is that, well, let's read the verse. Do you want to pull it up there in your translation? And let's have a look at that.
I wanted to ask you about that. Let's see. Let's see if
I understand the Christian interpretation, but it's at least worthwhile to know there's another way of reading it.
Now, it's a riddle. And here we are.
So you want to read that?
Yes, sir. Okay. Proverbs 30, verse 4, it says, who hath ascended up into heaven or descended? Who hath gathered the wind in his fist? Who hath bound the waters in a garment? Who hath established all the ends of the earth? What is his name? And what is his son's name, if thou canst tell?
So I think, tell me, well, let's start with how you interpret the question, what is his name and what is his son's name?
Well, it's a riddle. And I believe I know the answer to that.
What's the answer?
His name is Yehovah. Because who else has gathered the wind in his fist? Was it an angel? It certainly wasn't a man. Who has ascended up into heaven or descended? I believe the first part of the question is answered Yehovah. I believe that's his name.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, give me the second half, because that's the more interesting one from
okay.
Our perspective.
And what is the son's name, if thou can tell? Well, okay. I know that you're a Karaite Jew. And if I'm going to make any argument about what I believe,
just share what your interpretation is. We don't have to argue about it. I just think it's worthwhile to know there's multiple interpretations, and what are they?
I'm only going to use the Tanakh, then, is what I'm saying. My rationale.
What in your own personal belief and conviction, what's the answer to what is his son's name?
I believe it's Yeshua HaMashiach.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. So, and then for the audience who doesn't know, that'd be like the equivalent of Jesus Christ.
Jesus Christ. Yes.
Okay. Great. All right. So there's two Jewish interpretations, at least I'm aware of. There might be other ones of this verse. In fact, let me pull those up here rather than I can even give you the names of who interpreted that.
While you're pulling that up, I guess it ties into the other question, Elohim. Let us make man in our own image. It's talking about plural. What do you think? Let us make man in our own image. There seems to be.
Let's come back to that. So
okay.
There's two main ways of interpreting this in the Jewish world.
Yes.
One is that this is a rhetorical question. So what's a rhetorical question? In English, you could say, a rhetorical question could be like, what is an example of a rhetorical question? Well, when you say to somebody, are you an idiot? You don't expect them to say yes or no, right? It's a rhetorical question.
Okay.
And really, it's a way of saying you are an idiot when you say to somebody, "Are you an idiot?" Now, in Hebrew, rhetorical questions are a bit different because the answer is usually no, in the negative. And there are a series of rhetorical questions at the end of Job, where he asks them how different things in nature were done, and if anybody knows. And the answer is no, nobody knows that, because only God knows that. And so the Jewish understanding here is that this is a rhetorical question. What is the name of the human who has done this? And so here's a little bit of a background. In ancient Middle Eastern culture, if someone was very important, they would be known by the name of their son. This has survived in the Arabic world and to a lesser extent in the Jewish world. So, for example, there's a rabbi in the Talmud named Abba Shaul, which means father of Saul. Or what was his personal name? We don't know. Because he was an important person, he was called father of Saul, right? And then you have this in the Arabic world today, where you have Abu Musa and Abu, what's the dictator of the Palestinian Authority? Abu something. I don't even remember what his name is. Abu Abbas, that's his name. The guy who was elected over 20 years ago and is still in power, because they don't really have elections. So that's Abu Abbas. What name did Abu Abbas's mother give him? I don't know, but it wasn't Abu Abbas, right? It was Ismail or something. I have no idea, right? Because he wants to be presented as an important person, he's called Abu Abbas. And Abba Shaul was an important person, so he's named after Saul, his son. And so when it says, what is his name? If you understand it as a rhetorical question, I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying here's another way of looking at it, right?
Sure. I appreciate that.
Which is, give me the name of a human who can go up to heaven or go down into Sheol. And if he's really important, give me not only his name, give me his son's name, right? Tell me that his name is Avi Moshe, or Avi, something, the father, or Abba something, right? And the point is, there isn't even an important human being, because only God can do that. And there's a similar verse in Isaiah chapter 40. Let's look at that verse. And just not to convince you, because I understand where you're coming from.
Well, I appreciate what you're saying.
But just to understand, I want to make it clear, this isn't just like, if you didn't know that God, if you didn't know, and Jews don't know, that God has a son named Yeshua, how would you interpret it? That's the question. And really, I'm asking this question. Before Jesus came to the earth, how did Jews interpret it? That's really the question, right? How did the disciples of Jesus interpret this 1 year before he revealed himself, right? That's the question, right? Sure. So Isaiah chapter 40, verses 12 through 16, really 12 and 14 through 14 are the key verses. Can you read those?
Oh, yes, sir. Let me put it up on screen for us. Okay,
Great.
let's see here. Isaiah 40, 12 through 14?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it says, who hath measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, and meted out heaven with the span, and comprehended the dust of the earth in a measure, and weighed the mountains in scales and the hills in a balance?
Now, if you stop here, you would say, oh, that's God. Obviously, that's God. But then when you read verse 13, you're like, oh, the answer is nobody, because only God can do that, right? So who here means which human has done this? Which mortal or which even deity has done this, right? Which among the gods has done this? Nobody, only Yehovah. So read verse 13.
Okay. Who hath directed the spirit of Yehovah?
Nobody is the answer, right? It's a rhetorical question, and the answer is in the negative, which means nobody.
By the way, you see the capital S right here?
Yeah.
Anytime we're talking about the Yehovah, we should have a capital S, not a lowercase s, correct?
Maybe not. Meaning that if you say the spirit of Yehovah, we'll look at that in a minute. Let's finish reading these two verses.
Yes, sir. Where do you want to go?
Keep reading these verses. Or being his counsel.
Who hath directed the spirit of Yehovah, or being his counselor hath taught him? With whom took he counsel? And who instructed him? And taught him in the path of judgment, and taught him knowledge, and showed to him the way of understanding.
So who did God get advice from? Because God, we need advice. Who did God get advice from? And the answer is nobody. It's a rhetorical question, and the answer is there is no answer to this, or the answer is in the negative, nobody. And that's how Jews are understanding Proverbs 30 verse 4 is, what is his name and what is his son's name? Nobody. Nobody can do that except for God. But there's another interpretation in Judaism What is his name and what is his son's name? His name is Yehovah, and his son's name is Israel, because it says in Exodus and in Hosea 11 as well that God's firstborn son is Israel. Now, I don't think that's what Proverbs intended, but if you want to interpret it that way as a Jew, you can.
Okay.
Right? In other words, if you want to give it an answer as a Jew and you don't believe in Jesus because Jesus hasn't come yet and you don't know about him, or it's after Jesus came and you're not a Christian, then the answer you would have to give is either it's a rhetorical question, or the answer is, oh yeah, his name is Yehovah and his son's name is Israel.
That's a great insight there. Let me ask you about this that I found. I wanted to know if you had seen this before. We're talking about the name of God. Exodus 3:14. And God said unto Moses, I am that I am. And he said, thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, I am hath sent me unto you. What do I do with this now that we know the name Yehovah? Well, how would you translate this?
So here if you want to represent what's in the Hebrew, you would have I am that I am would be Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. That's Ehyeh. Ehyeh Asher. Asher is Asher. Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. And then he says, Ehyeh has sent me unto you. And Ehyeh means I am or I will be.
Well, so that leads me to the question of, I understand that the name Yehovah means I was, I am, I shall be. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, and that's the way many Jews have interpreted over the centuries. Definitely.
Okay.
And they get it from this verse. In other words, so Hebrew is a verb-based language, like other Semitic languages. And there's a principle that most words have a 3-letter root. There are some exceptions, like prepositions and whatnot. And the 3-letter root of Ehyeh, I am or I will be, is the same as Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, he that, it means he that. The understanding is it's a combination of Hayahoveh and Yehyeh. He was, he is, and he will be. And that's certainly how it was understood in the book of Revelation, when it says he that was, he that is, and he that is to come. There's almost no doubt, and this was understood by Christian scholars, that is a reference to the meaning of the name. And it actually makes a lot of sense. If we can look at that in the New Testament, and it actually, I think it's an important context there. Let's see.
Where it says, I'm the same yesterday, today, and forever?
No, it's in the book of Revelation.
Okay.
And let's see. And look, this isn't some discovery of mine. Many Christian scholars have realized this.
Folks, you're hearing inside of the Word of God. You're not going to hear anywhere else, by and large. They don't teach us in churches. I love the work that you're doing. And, God's not the author.
Churches, I don't know. Revelation 1:4. Actually, we want the passage where it says holy, holy, holy. Well, let's look at Revelation 1:4 first. Let's start with that. Because there's a number of passages that have it.
Oh, that's right. This was something I forgot to write down. I just saw it, the 7 spirits of God. You're going to have to do a program on that. I want to get your take on that sometime.
I don't know that I have any great insights there, but okay. And peace from him which is, and which was, and which is to come.
Okay.
So what does that mean? What? It's a strange thing to say. Why would he say that? What does he mean by that? Like, what is there some Hebrew context to that? That's really the question. And there are people who have tried to give it a Greek context, and it appears again in chapter 1, verse 8. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, saith the Lord. Now, who's the Lord here? And I don't want to get into the whole Trinitarian question.
Well,
but
should
the Lord
in the Aleph? I am the Tav in the Aleph?
Or the Aleph and the Tav, maybe. But let's leave that aside, right? When he says I am the beginning and the end, where does that come from, that phrase? Do you know where that comes from?
Well, I'm thinking it comes out of the name Yehovah. I was, I am, I shall be.
Well, not I am the beginning and the end. Where that comes from somewhere else. That comes from Isaiah. That comes from Isaiah 44:6 and Isaiah 48:12, where it says, "Thus." Let's look at Isaiah 44:6.
Okay. 44:6.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Thus saith Yehovah, the King of Israel, and his Redeemer, Yehovah of hosts. I am the first and I am the last. There you go. And beside me there is no God.
Now, why is he saying this in Isaiah? And I want to give an historical reason of why he's saying it, right? You can come up with all kinds of theological explanations. But the historical reason is that if we look in Isaiah 45, it mentions a man by name whose name is Cyrus, or in Hebrew, Koresh. And Cyrus was the king of the Persian Empire. He was the Persian emperor. And Cyrus, in the year 538 BCE, that's the traditional, and by traditional, I mean the modern scholarly traditional date. I don't know that that's a correct date, but let's call it 538 BCE. Some people make it 516. I don't know. So in the late 6th century BCE, before the Common Era, or BC, before Christ for Christians, Cyrus issues a decree that's quoted in the Tanakh, which allows the Jews to go back to Israel and rebuild the temple. It's the closing words of, it's the opening words of Ezra, and the closing words of Second Chronicles are what's called the decree of Cyrus. So, and the Tanakh explanation is that God put it in the heart of Cyrus to let the Jews who had been taken captive by the Babylonians go back to the land of Israel and rebuild the temple. Cyrus may have had his own reasons. So Cyrus, who is allowing the Jews to go back, is not and let's read, actually, I think it's worth reading in Ezra chapter 1, because it gives the context for Isaiah 44.
Okay.
And then that gives in turn the context for Revelation chapter 1, verse 8. So Ezra chapter 1, you want to read that? Like the first 3 verses, 4 verses.
Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of Yehovah by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, Yehovah stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and put it also in the writing, saying, Thus saith Cyrus, king of Persia, Yehovah, God of heaven, hath given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he hath charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah.
Now, let me stop there. If we just read that, we would think, oh, Cyrus is a perfectly good believer, right? He knows about the God Yehovah. He calls him by name.
Yes.
And he must believe in him. Well, not necessarily. The ancient in ancient cultures, they would, if they were trying to impress you, they would call upon the name of your God, because then you'd be more likely to listen to them. So let's keep reading here.
Okay. It goes on to say, Who is there among you of all his people? His God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and build the house of Yehovah, God of Israel. He is the God, which is in Jerusalem. And
so he is the God. Who says that? Is that Cyrus saying that, or is that or is that the Ezra who's writing this down saying this? And if it's Cyrus, wow, then Cyrus is a believer. It seems like it probably wasn't Cyrus. And the reason for saying that we'll see in Isaiah 45 in a second. Let's just see one thing here. That's interesting. Let's see. Yeah. So this is quoted in 2 Chronicles 36:23, right? The same exact decree. And I hope I'm getting this right. Let me pull this up here and make sure this is the same
2
thing.
Chronicles 36.
36:23 is the equivalent of Ezra 1:3.
Thus saith Cyrus, king of Persia, all the kingdoms of the earth
I'm sorry, that's verse 1, chapter 1, verse 2.
Okay.
Right. In other words, Ezra 1:1 and verse 2 is 2 Chronicles 36:23 verbatim. Right.
Okay.
But then it ends with the word Vaya'al, and let him go up. It doesn't bring the full decree. And the statement, he is God, that doesn't appear in 2 Chronicles. So it's not clear, were these the words of Cyrus? Oh, and then here's another way of reading Ezra 1:3. It's not that so your translation is inaccurate here. Now that
Okay.
I'm looking at the Hebrew, let's look at your translation again. Or I would translate it differently. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe you could disagree with me. So they put "he is God" in parentheses to imply Ezra is the one who said those words, and not it's chapter 1 verse 3.
Oh, 1 verse 3. Well,
So when
listen,
they put it, sorry, go ahead.
I've got an inferior version in English to the
Okay.
Hebrew.
Okay.
There's no.
Well, so the way I read the Hebrew is "he is the God that is in Jerusalem." In other words, there are many gods. He just happens to be the one that's in Jerusalem, so you should go build a temple for him in Jerusalem. That seems to be what Cyrus is saying here. And your translator didn't like that, so they put it in parentheses to make those the words of Ezra. So in other words, and let there be just what it says here. And build the house of the Lord God of Israel, which is in Jerusalem. Right? The house is in Jerusalem, not the God is in Jerusalem. But that's not what it says seemingly in the Hebrew. I mean, the way I read the Hebrew is Cyrus is not a believer. And he says, and let them build the house of Yehovah, the God of Israel. He is the God that is in Jerusalem. Why are you building this temple in Jerusalem? Because the God in Jerusalem is Yehovah. Here in Susa, there's another God. And in Babylon, there's another God. Right? So they build the God, the temple to, Marduk in Babylon. And they're going to build the temple to Yehovah in Jerusalem because he's the God in Jerusalem. Right? So in other words, Cyrus is not a believer, at least the way it seems from the Hebrew, even though the King James wants him to be. So now let's look at So we don't have to look at it. Well, I'll just tell you the overall. Go ahead. Sorry, you want to say something?
I want to say this. I believe we have an obligation after nearly 300 years.
Mm-hmm.
Now knowing the name of our God, Yehovah, we can no longer compromise and just accept capital L-O-R-D. I force myself now as I read the King James every day. God told me to speak his word. I put his name back in there. And you know what? Let me tell you the epitome of this.
Yeah.
Years ago, I heard a Muslim. He was on a radio program, and he was mocking Christians, Jews. He was mocking us all. He said they don't even know the name of their God. At least we know the name of ours. And I'm thinking, what does he mean by that? And well, most people don't. Listen, I know people who are the Kohanim, last name Cohen, and I've come to them and I said, listen, have you heard of Dr. Nehemia Gordon's work? Listen, they found the name of Yehovah, and they've got the Hebrew scrolls to back it up. Now, if we're going to say that we know the name of God, it's got to be in the Hebrew text. You don't find Yahweh in there, but you find Yehovah.
Most Jewish people know it's Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. They might not know the exact vowels, but they know it's Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, right?
Well, so
imagine if you took out those vowels, you would still have some idea of how to. You could maybe mispronounce it. And look, my name is Nehemia. People call me Nehemia and Nehemiah, but it's still different than I like to say. Just don't call me Baldy, right? That's very sensitive.
Nehemia, right? But here's the problem. I asked Joe Cohen, my good friend, and I asked Ron Cohen, my friend. They're Messianic believers.
Oh,
I said, do you know the name of God, the Father? His name is Yehovah. No, they didn't know.
They'd never heard that it was Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. They just maybe didn't know the pronunciation.
No, they don't know. Now some may have guessed it's Jehovah, and I've heard a lot of people say Yahweh, but now here's my next question.
Yeah.
In the research you've done, have you ever found Yahweh? And I believe, if I heard you right, Yahweh was invented by the Samaritans and comes from Jupiter, one of the Roman gods. Is that?
To be more accurate, Yahweh was invented by a Christian Hebrew scholar. I want to say the year was 1599. And he bases it on a church father named Theodoret of Cyrus. And Theodoret says that the Jews don't pronounce the name, the Tetragrammaton, the 4-letter name of God. But he says the Jews pronounce it as Ayah, and the Samaritans pronounce it Yahweh. And so this Christian, I want to say his name was Genebard, but I don't remember. Yeah, I think his name was Genebard. He comes along in 1599. He says, well, what does this mean, that what Theodoret says? Because Yahweh is not a Hebrew word. What would it be in Hebrew? He says, oh, that's Yahweh, or what later became in Christianity Yahweh. Right? So he's the first one that I'm aware of in 1599, I want to say the year is, who comes up with Yahweh. And then look, in 100 or 200 years ago, they were still debating it. Now the scholars have decided, okay, It is Yahweh for various reasons, and we could talk hours and hours about what those reasons are.
But it's not his.
I don't think the best evidence points to that being his name. I think there's if you I'm going to phrase it this way: if you rely on Jewish Hebrew sources, then there is no evidence for his name being Yahweh. There's not a single Hebrew Bible manuscript that I've ever found that has the vowels Yahweh. And look, I've had people say that proves it's not his name, or that proves that it is his name, right? Because if you ever found a Hebrew because whatever his name is, that's what we won't find evidence for. That's like conspiracy theory thinking.
God's not the author of confusion. We know who is Satan, Satan. Nehemia, when you first got started, I think I remember you also talking about God's agricultural reckoning of time. And based on what you know, the Aviv of the barley, where are we at on the Hebrew calendar right now? What year are we in right now?
I have a policy of not getting involved in the Hebrew calendar. When I lived in Israel for decades, I went out and would observe the new moon, and I would examine the Aviv barley. And about almost 10 years ago, after I had left Israel and was living in the U.S., I made a decision that I need to leave that for people who are in the land. There's an ancient story which appears in the Talmud. And the story is about these rabbis in Babylon who are trying to figure out and this is before there was a fixed calendar, right? So when they wanted to know where we are in the Hebrew year, they would look at information from the land of Israel. And so there's these rabbis sitting around in Babylonia, in what today is Iraq. And they ask, okay, is this a leap year or not a leap year? Because it wasn't fixed. It was based on the agricultural cycles in Israel. And the rabbis got this information, or at least they tell the story, about these 3 cowherds, or in one version, shepherds, who are talking about certain things in the weather and in the cycles of nature. And the takeaway from the story is that better shepherds in the land of Israel than scholars in Babylon. Well, right now I'm a scholar in Babylon, so I defer to those in the land of Israel who live in the land of Israel. For better or for worse, they're the ones who are living in the land, and I'm staying out of it to defer to the shepherds, and perhaps there's even scholars in Israel, maybe not just shepherds.
That's a fair answer.
Even if they were just shepherds or cowherds, it would be preferable to defer to them.
I've got 3 or 4 more questions for you today, and I'll hold the rest for next time. Now, you are a Karaite Jew. That means you hold to the literal translation of the Tanakh, the Torah, prophets, the writings.
I wouldn't describe it that way, but what's the question?
Well, in other words, you don't include the Talmud, correct?
So I don't consider the Talmud to be scripture. I think it's interesting commentary.
Yes.
Frankly, more wrong than it is right.
I would agree.
Maybe that's, I don't know if that's true or not statistically, but it's often wrong. So I just look to the Tanakh, and it's not necessarily the literal interpretation. In Judaism, we have a term pshat, P-S-H-A-T, or Peshin Tet, and pshat means the plain meaning. Pshat is usually the literal interpretation, but not necessarily. If it says circumcise the foreskin of your heart, the pshat means don't be stubborn and submit to God's will, whereas a literal interpretation would be, oh, I have to open up my heart and cut off a little piece, right? So the pshat is usually the literal interpretation, but not always. It's there's a technical definition of pshat, which is the interpretation based on the language and the context using reason, which is every word there has significance. I'll hear from a lot of Christians who will say, I don't interpret the Bible, I just read it. Well, you do interpret it. You just don't realize how you're interpreting it. We will use terms in our just like colloquial English, at least Jews will. We'll say, oh, well, that's just an interpretation. Well, everything is an interpretation. The question is that interpretation based on the language and the context using reason, or is it what we really mean? Is that a far-fetched interpretation? Did you pluck it out of context and read meaning into it? And a lot of times people will read meaning into the text, and I'm opposed to that. I think we should.
I made that statement is because if I was not a Messianic believer, I would want to be a Karaite, because that's all that I hold to is the Tanakh. But I only preface that by saying, and I respect your answer. As a Karaite Jew, how do you spend the Shabbat? What is
Oh,
your
wow.
understanding of how?
So
Because I believe in the Shabbat, sundown Friday night to sundown Saturday night, wherever I'm at. Is that right?
absolutely, yeah. That's kind of the no-brainer part. The
Okay.
question is, here I have a bunch of cultural baggage I need to share with the people, and whether they know it or not, when they approach Shabbat, they probably do too. If they're reading online at a source like, I don't know, like any mainstream Jewish source, and you're dealing with a lot of cultural baggage. And
Yes,
what's
sir.
the cultural baggage? The Torah says don't work on Shabbat and that you should rest, or cease could be another way of translating it. Cease from your work. So what does it mean to what does it mean to work? So the rabbis say in the Talmud, they say the laws of Sabbath are like a mountain hanging by a hair. And what they mean by that is that there are very few verses that define what work is. And they've made what we say in English, a mountain out of a molehill. In the Talmud, it's a mountain hanging by a hair. Right? They have a few words, and based on those few words, they have derived, or frankly made up, a whole bunch of interpretations of or explanations of what it means to work. Strangely enough, work is not included in those, right? So they define work, and I call this legalistic, in a technical manner. They've defined work, where it refers to specific actions, to the point where tearing toilet paper on Shabbat, and I'm not trying to be funny, literally tearing toilet paper, they consider to be work. But if you're carrying a couch on your back up and down the stairs all day within your house, that's not work.
Wow.
Right. So that's an example I was given when I was younger.
Okay.
So I just try to take it intuitively. What is work? Work is to work, right? I mean, if you work for a living, you know what work is. Whatever it is you do for a living, that's work. And there are things you might not do for a living that are laborious, and those are work as well. So that's how I approach it. An Orthodox Jew would say I'm violating Shabbat. That's fine. I think they're probably violating Shabbat too. So the feeling's mutual. We're both doing our best. And if it requires someone to go across the sea, well, I'm bound by what I know, because there's no way I can intuitively know that I'm required to work. Maybe what is work, that might be intuitive. But the actual requirement to rest on Shabbat, nobody would come to that conclusion except that God told us to.
And Nehemia, when we read the word and in the New Testament, and Yeshua was going to the synagogue on the Sabbath, and like he was reading a scroll at one point in time, would that have been like on a Saturday morning there in Jerusalem, or would that have been?
I mean, well, first of all, that was in Capernaum, so it wasn't in Jerusalem.
Okay. In other words, did the
Jews? Sorry, that was in Nazareth, in his own town, right? That's where he got in trouble.
I lived in Panama one time.
What's that?
I lived in Panama one time.
Okay.
And Friday night, when the Shabbat would start, there's a large segment of Jewish people in Panama, by the way. And I had some next door neighbors in the condominium, and they would go out, and I think they were going to the synagogue to pray.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was just curious, a Shabbat service, is that usually Saturday during the day, or can it be Friday evenings too?
So it's interesting. I once had this conversation with a Southern Baptist, and he was saying that for him, the Sabbath is Sunday morning and Wednesday night. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? He said, well, that's when we go to church. And that blew my mind, because Orthodox Jews go to the synagogue. My father, who was an Orthodox rabbi, went to synagogue if he was able to. Sometimes he couldn't because of work. But ideally, he would go to synagogue 21 times a week.
Wow.
You could do a double header, in which, right, you limit it to 14, right? But there were 21 or really 22 formal prayers every week. There are 3 daily prayers, and on Shabbat you have the Musaf, which is an extra prayer. So let's call that 22, right?
Wow.
So, but you only read the Torah in traditional services 3 times a week: Monday morning, Thursday morning, and Shabbat morning. You don't read from the Torah on Tuesday afternoon or Tuesday evening, right? And when I say the double header is what they'll do is the afternoon prayer and the evening prayer, they'll go just before sunset, and they'll stay long enough where they get the evening and the afternoon and the evening prayer in one shot, right? So they'll be there for like, I don't know, a half hour, 45 minutes, and they'll cover 2 prayers with 1 visit, right? But in principle, they should be going to synagogue 21 or 22 times a week, right? And so that's not you go on Shabbat, you go for every formal prayer, which is 21 or 22 times a week.
So really, it's like I've been telling people,
Mhm.
You know, because I was raised in the Christian church. Both my grandfathers were pastor, and we were made to feel guilty if we did anything on Sunday. That they said that's a Sabbath. Well, I learned it's not. It's Friday night, sundown to Saturday night, sundown.
Yes.
Now, and I said, look, you're confusing something here. You can go to church as much as you want,
Yeah.
but the day you go to church,
I mean, aren't there Catholics who go to mass every morning? I think there are.
yeah, I said, you know, the Sabbath is one event. Whether or not you go to church or temple on that day, it's up to you. You could go every day, but we can't change God's calendar of time. It's always been Friday night, sundown to Saturday night, sundown. Just so happens that people go to church and the Christian church on Sunday. Well, I think that's wrong. I think it's pagan. But if that's, it's like Chick-fil-A. You've been to Chick-fil-A? This guy said, I'm going to close on the Sabbath. He closes on Sunday. He meant well, but he should be closing on Saturday. I'm just saying. But I agree with you. You can go to church all you want, any day you want.
So then why is it pagan to go on Sunday? You can go 7 days a week.
Well, you can. You can, but just don't say that Sunday's the Sabbath, because it's not.
And what's interesting is there was a scholar, and I forget his name. He was like a Seventh-day Adventist. And I believe he's the first Protestant to have gone to like the Catholic University at the Vatican. And he did this research in Catholic sources to try to find out when did they change. And someone can post in the comments here his name. I forget. It's an Italian name. He did this research, like academic scholarly research. When did the Catholics change from Saturday to Sunday? And his discovery was quite surprising. The discovery was that it wasn't until the 20th century that there was ever a Catholic. Now, Protestant might be different, but there was never a Catholic until the 20th century that said Sunday is the Sabbath. What they said was Sunday is the Lord's Day, and the Sabbath has been done away with and replaced by the Lord's Day. But they always acknowledged that Saturday was the Sabbath, and just we go to church and have our main worship on Sunday morning. Meaning that was the Catholic position. Isn't that interesting?
They also say in their Catholic writings that the Catholic Church changed the Shabbat from Friday sundown to Saturday night sundown as their mark of ecclesiastical authority. They believe they have the right to change the times and seasons, and that's where they go wrong. So I don't feel guilty anymore if I cut my grass on a Sunday, because that's not the Sabbath. Now I won't want to do it during the Shabbat. Listen, I had a gun store back in Georgia.
Oh.
I was raised with a BB gun at age 5. You know, that's part of being an American. And I won't give my 5-year-old son a BB gun, though. Forget that. Because I shot out windows and shot my brother in the fanny with it. And my grandmother confiscated it. But I used to close on Saturday. And people came to me and said, you're crazy. That's our biggest day. I said, listen, it's the 10 Commandments. And I said, I'm going to honor God, and I'm going to close on Saturday, and I'm going to open on Sunday. Now, they thought I had turned into a heretic because I was opening on Sunday. They said, are you Jehovah's Witness or something? I said, no, but I believe God will bless me. And, you know, we have a maid here that works with us and helps us with our children. And she appreciates the job, and we appreciate her. And you know what? We give her off one day a week, which is what you're supposed to do here. And we give her off on the Sabbath. And she's ecstatic because everybody else has to work on Saturday. But we give her off Saturday. Now, let me ask you a question. About 2 more questions. In the synagogue, the temple, Yeshua was handed the scroll. He read in Hebrew, didn't he? He didn't read in Latin, did he? People are saying that they didn't speak Hebrew. And
if you read the scroll, obviously he was reading in Hebrew. That's not even a question. The question is, when he put down the scroll and started to interpret, was he speaking Aramaic or was he speaking Hebrew? That's a valid question. To suggest he read the scroll in anything other than Hebrew is kind of ludicrous.
Well, if he read it in Hebrew, then we also know he spoke Hebrew, and so did everybody at that time, didn't they?
Not necessarily. There are people who. So there's this idea that Hebrew is a dead language, and it's sort of true. It's true in the sense that when children were speaking to their babies or toddlers are speaking to their mother, and that's what we call a mother tongue. For centuries they weren't speaking in Hebrew. But when a Jew from Poland met a Jew from Morocco, which happened all the time, they were a common profession for Jews was to be a merchant. And so
Yes.
they would travel all over the world, and a Jew could arrive from Poland and Morocco with his merchandise, and they could speak to each other. They did not speak in Polish or Arabic or Berber. They spoke to each other in Hebrew. And we have letters of them writing to each other from all over the Jewish world in Hebrew. There are Jews, from all over the world who are writing to each other usually in Hebrew, especially if they came from places where they didn't speak the same language. So they would have a mother tongue, and if they had any kind of education, they could also read and write Hebrew, and then in many cases speak Hebrew. I was in Rome, where there are native Jews that have been there for probably they were taken as slaves by the Romans from
Yes.
Judea 2,000 years ago. And you go into their store, and I speak to them in English, and then the one seller turns to the other one in Hebrew and says, "I think we can get this guy for more money." And he doesn't know that I speak Hebrew. And I thought that was amazing. You guys, did you move to Israel? No, I've never been to Israel. So there are Jewish communities where the scholars would learn Hebrew, and they would learn to speak Hebrew and to write, and especially write in Hebrew. But then there are other Jewish communities where even the local Jews, they speak Italian to each other, but if they don't want an Italian to understand, they speak to each other in Hebrew. And that's been going on for 2,000 years. So Hebrew was never a dead language in the way that, let's say, Akkadian was a dead language, right? Akkadian was an ancient language, an ancient Semitic language spoken in Babylonia, and there was never anybody who spoke or even read Akkadian for almost 2,000 years. Ancient Egyptian is different. There were people who prayed in ancient Egyptian always, and that's called Coptic, right? So ancient Egyptian is different than Akkadian. Hebrew is kind of in between, right? Meaning Hebrew is more like Coptic in that there were people who spoke it, even though it wasn't their native language, and there were people who read it and wrote it, and even some scholars and some communities who spoke it. So in that sense, Hebrew never completely died out. And I forget what the question was that brought us to the topic.
Did they speak Hebrew there, and at the Second Temple?
So in the Second Temple period, they definitely spoke Hebrew. I think that's beyond question at this point in history. We have these letters that were found in the 1950s in these caves in the Judean desert. They're part of the Dead Sea Scrolls, but they're from the Bar Kokhba revolt, which was between the year 132 and 135, when the Jews revolted against the Romans, and then they were chased into these caves, and some of them died in the caves. There's one cave called the Cave of Horrors, where people were actually just died in the caves eventually. And in these letters, they write in Hebrew. They write in other languages too, but some of what they write is in Hebrew. And in the 1950s, scholars realized that the Hebrew they're writing in sounds like it was Hebrew that was spoken. They're using things like contractions, and that's a feature of a spoken language rather than just a written language. And so it seems that even in the 2nd century CE or AD, there were still people who spoke Hebrew. It doesn't mean everybody spoke Hebrew. It also doesn't mean the Hebrew in the time of the Bar Kokhba revolt is the same as the Hebrew in the time of Moses or Ezra, right? Hebrew had evolved over time, but it was a type of Hebrew.
Okay.
And so Jesus almost certainly spoke Hebrew. Whether he also spoke, I'm sure he also spoke Aramaic and Greek. That seems quite likely.
Okay. Saul of Tarsus, who was later renamed Paul. I understand he was a student of Gamaliel. And someone told me, I don't know if this is true, but if you were a student of his, you would have had to have memorized the whole Torah and be able to recite it rote memory. If that's the case,
that's probably true. That may or may not be. It seems like that could be true. It's a bit complicated. So it says that, not just to be a disciple of Gamaliel, to we have this curriculum of Jewish education where they say that by 5 you know the entire Torah, and it's different ages. I forget what all the different ones are. And there were definitely people who would memorize large swaths of information. It's unclear though exactly when that comes into being, because in the early or one of the most accurate manuscripts of the Mishnah doesn't actually have that, so that might be added.
Well, we know that Paul was a learned man. He was under Gamaliel. Okay. Now, I can't prove this, but I've heard it said that he was a member of the Sanhedrin. And
Paul was a member of the Sanhedrin?
I don't know. Have you ever read anything to that account?
Now, here's that claim. I don't know that there's evidence of that. Maybe it's true. I don't know.
So this is what they said. They said if you're a member of the Sanhedrin, you would have had to have been married. You couldn't be a single man and be part of the Sanhedrin. So the question is, was Paul ever married?
I don't know.
His wife died, or was he?
I never met his wife, but it's possible.
Okay. I've got 2 more questions to ask you. Now I'm going to ask you the
That's
most
really an intriguing thought. Like, you're making me think here. So if Paul was on the Sanhedrin, was he on the Sanhedrin when Yeshua was put on trial?
I think maybe he resigned if he was when he converted at the
yeah, but before that was after Yeshua's
I'm sorry, you're right. You're exactly right.
Yeah.
No, yeah.
So that was quite a few years. Well, not that many, but a few years before.
Sure.
So
you're right.
So in other words, was he a member of the Sanhedrin? That's a fascinating thing to think about.
Well, he was
Somebody should write a novel of Paul on the Sanhedrin and how he behaved when Jesus was put on trial. Wow, what an intriguing idea!
I would just wonder if he was ever married.
Historical novel.
Someone said he had to have been married if he was Sanhedrin. Now I'm going to ask you the most controversial question you probably ever been asked, but I do it because I don't know the answer, and I figure because you're you read the Tanakh and you study it, maybe you'll be able to give me a good answer to this. Okay, I don't mean this to embarrass anybody, but I want to know.
Okay.
One of the commandments of Yehovah is that during menstruation week for a woman, you're not to come near a woman and have relations. You're supposed to be set apart. Basically, don't have sex when your wife's menstruating. But is that only for a 7-day period? And does it start when the period begins? In other words, Nehemia, I don't want to be judged of God for having relations too soon after my wife has had her period. I'm waiting presently. If my wife had a period on a Monday, we won't have relations again for 7 days till next Monday. Am I calculating that right? Or is it actually 8 days? Or is it even longer than that?
So let's start with, we should not be embarrassed about this topic. It's an important topic. Let me show you how important it is. And I know you probably want a short answer. That is unlikely with me.
No, I don't know anybody who can answer this question for me. Right. I don't.
So the short answer is you're right. But now let's give you the long answer. So I want to read you, or I want you to read me actually, Ezekiel chapter 18. And Ezekiel 18 is a series of passages or a series of scenarios where Ezekiel is talking about somebody who sins and repents and somebody who does good and then he turns to bad. And he doesn't list all the commandments specifically. He lists the big ones. And in chapters 18, verses 5 through, let's see, 5 through 9. Let's read that. And pay attention here. He's not giving you every commandment. He's just saying what the really big ones are to say this is a righteous man.
Okay. It says, but if a man be just and do that which is lawful and right, and hath not eaten up upon the mountains.
And that's some kind of idolatry to eat upon the mountains. Right? In other words, he talks about in Jeremiah, they eat on the top of every hill and under every leafy tree. They go up to the high places and they eat a sacrifice to a pagan god or to Yehovah in the wrong place.
Usually swine too, right?
No, not necessarily. No. I mean, we have high places that have been excavated. It seems like they were mostly doing sheep and goats and
okay. And hath not eaten upon the mountains, neither hath lifted up his eyes to the idols of the house of Israel. Neither hath defiled his neighbor's wife. Neither hath come near to a menstruous woman.
And come near is a euphemism for had sex with. So to it's up there with idolatry and with adultery. That's how the Old Testament looks at it. So it is so number one, you shouldn't be embarrassed discussing. This is an important topic to talk about.
But how do we count? Nobody's ever talked about it.
We'll talk about that in a second. Like I said, I'm short story long.
Sorry. Hey, listen, take your time on this one because I have searched high and low for an answer.
Yeah.
And
basically,
I trust
you got it right, but I want to explain why there's confusion. And it probably wouldn't be obvious to someone who, if you go and you look on Chabad.org or .com or whatever their website is, you're going to get the wrong answer.
Right.
But I think it's important to know why you're going to get the wrong answer. Okay, I want you to read me another passage, and this one is from the the New Testament, Acts 21:25.
Okay. As touching the Gentiles which believe, we have written and
So the
concluded.
context here is they're discussing, okay, did the Gentiles need to convert to Judaism, be circumcised? What do they need to do?
Okay.
Right. And this verse can be interpreted in different ways, but right. In other words, are these the 4 minimum things they have to do, and then they have to do other things as well as they learn, or maybe they just have to do these 4 things. Both are possible. But let's at least read what the 4 things are that are indisputable.
As touching the Gentiles which believe, we have written and concluded that they observe no such thing, save only that they keep themselves from things offered to idols, and from blood, and from strangled, and from fornication.
So what is blood? So blood might be eating blood, because when you slaughter an animal, there's a thing called blood pudding. They have it in like England. I once went to a buffet and I'm like, what is that disgusting black thing? They said, that's blood pudding. We don't eat it either, but the Scottish love it. That's what the English guy told me. So that could be blood, but blood also refers to menstrual blood. Not that you're eating it, but that you have sex with a woman who is in what's called the menstrual impurity or nidah. So it seems like that does apply even in the New Testament. Even a minimalist interpretation that you only do these 4 things and you don't have to do anything else. Blood is part of it. The laws of blood. All right. So now that we understand that, Leviticus 15 is very confusing to a lot of people. I've had people who read Leviticus 15 and say, oh, if my wife sits in a certain chair, I'm not allowed to sit in that chair. No. Leviticus 15 is a series of rules about becoming ritually clean and ritually unclean. And ritual uncleanness, it's not forbidden to become ritually unclean. However, it is specifically forbidden from having sex with a woman who is ritually unclean from menstrual blood. And there's 2 types of menstrual blood in Leviticus 15. There's a regular period, which is anything of and the word that's used in the Torah, I'll just use that word. The word is a flow of up to 7 days. And flow here would exclude spotting. Right, so if a woman has menstrual flow up to 7 days, then she counts 7 days from when she first sees the flow. If it goes beyond 7 days, or if it is not part of a regular cycle, meaning if it's a woman who's regular, guys, this is an adult conversation. It just is. If it's a woman who is not regular, then her cycle, whenever that is her cycle, right? But if she is regular and she has multiple days of bleeding, which is not part of a regular cycle, then it's a different category. And then you count 7 bloodless days. And so there's and I'll use the Hebrew terms. There's what we call nidah. Nidah is the regular menstrual cycle. And that's up to 7 days. And then there is zavah. Zavah is a outside of the regular days. And really, in modern terms, we would say, medically, we would say that's a miscarriage.
Okay.
Right? So in other words, it's the woman, it's not her regular cycle, and all of a sudden she bleeds for 2 or 3 days. Like, wait, what's going on here? Does she have cancer? God forbid. More than likely, it's a miscarriage.
Oh, okay. A real example.
Yeah.
Last Monday,
my
wife had her period start.
Okay.
So I know that I need to wait 7 days, but how do I count that? Would I say, okay, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday is 7?
Every day is counted from sunset to sunset. And so if she first started bleeding, or she saw it, right? If she doesn't know, right? If she first saw it, or felt it, I suppose, 5 minutes before sunset, that counts as the first day. That's Sunday. So it started on Sunday in that case, right?
Okay.
Meaning, or let's say if it's Monday, sorry. So you said it was on Monday. So if it's Monday and it started 5 minutes before sunset on Monday, then the Monday counts as the whole day. If it's 5 minutes after sunset, then Tuesday is day 1.
I was going to have relations. My wife said, I can't. We have your period. I said, oh, great. I got to wait 7 days now. Okay. So Monday, she started. Like Monday evening.
So you got to pay attention when it's sunset. So that counts as Tuesday.
Okay. So how do I count?
So it's Monday sunset to Tuesday sunset. That's day 1, right? So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and then the following Monday at sunset. That is when she becomes ritually clean. She should take a bath or a shower. And then at sunset on Monday, she becomes ritually clean. Because sunset Monday is when Tuesday begins.
Would I be safer just to say 8 days?
No, you don't need to say 8 days. You just got to pay attention to the Hebrew timing.
Okay. Because of the evening and the morning were the first day, right?
Right, but the Hebrew days are counted, and specifically for matters of ritual cleanliness, it's explicit that they're counted from sunset to sunset. Right? It always in Leviticus 15, a person becomes clean at sunset. Right? If they're unclean, they become clean at sunset. And also Numbers 19. Look at that.
So if you had your period on a Monday afternoon.
Mm-hmm. So then you got Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Sunday at sunset is when you're ritually clean.
Oh,
now if you keep bleeding into Sunday, the second Sunday past sunset, now you're into an 8th day, and then you need 7 bloodless days. So now let's talk about where the confusion comes from. I mean, I think that's pretty straightforward. That's what Leviticus 15 actually says.
Before you go there, here's the question. Let's say she has a 3-day period. Starts on a Monday and it ends on a Wednesday.
You're still counting 7 days from when the blood first flows.
Oh, okay. That's important. I didn't know that. I was confused. Okay.
And I want to look at something. So there's a bunch of laws in Leviticus 15, which quite frankly have zero application to the 21st century because they're related to becoming ritually unclean in the context of the tabernacle and later the temple. But then in Leviticus 18 and Leviticus 20, there's a specific commandment that that is a prohibition unrelated. Well, not it's related to 15. But so read to me Leviticus 18 verse 19, because Leviticus 15 doesn't say don't become ritually unclean. What it actually says is don't defile. I'm paraphrasing. Don't defile my tabernacle when you're unclean. So you're allowed to become unclean. You just can't have sex when you're unclean. So read verse 19.
Also, thou shalt not approach unto a woman to uncover her nakedness, as long as she is put apart for her uncleanness.
Right. So that's during the period of ritual uncleanness, which is 7 days from when the blood is first seen, it's forbidden to have sex with her. So to uncover someone's nakedness is to have sex with them. That's repeated in Leviticus 20. Let me find that verse.
Moreover, thou shalt not lie carnally with thy neighbor's wife.
That's a different thing. So Leviticus 20, not verse 20, chapter 20.
Oh, excuse me.
Let's see. Okay. A lot of the commandments in Leviticus 18 are repeated in Leviticus 20, often with slightly different wording. Or always with different wording. Leviticus 20 verse 18 is the repeat of Leviticus 18:19. Yeah, that's confusing, I know. So these are prohibitions, meaning there's no prohibition to become ritually unclean, but there is a prohibition to have sex with a woman who is in the state of nidav, menstrual impurity.
Yes. And, this is very important because people do it. And, listen, are you familiar?
No, you don't know. I mean,
are you unfamiliar with this verse that says a curse causeless shall not come?
Say it again.
It says a curse causeless shall not come. Let me give this to you.
I'm not familiar with that particular translation.
It is.
But it looks like it's Proverbs 26:2. Let's see what it says in the Hebrew.
Right. The blessing or the curse, we have to choose.
Mm-hmm.
God blesses and he curses. If you bless my people, I'll bless you. If you curse my people, I'll curse you. God's all about blessings and the curses. We have to choose every day. And that's why it's important. You're right. There are certain things that we don't have to do today, like temple sacrifice, or we're only for the priest.
Not only do we not have to do, we can't do. There's no way to do them because if you follow all the stipulations that are given, it's impossible to fulfill today.
But Nehemia, you would agree that the 10 Commandments are still for today, and
I think the whole Torah is for today. Just some of it we can't implement.
I agree with you, and that's why this is an important topic. And
for sure,
I want to ask you one. You see that I have the divine name up on the screen, Yehovah.
Yeah.
I want to thank Nehemia Gordon for making that known to me. Should I always spell it in caps, or is there any time where you would put lowercase?
I usually wouldn't put it in caps. I mean, just the Y is in English. Just the Y would be caps. You could put it all in caps if you want. But
I didn't know. I didn't know what was the proper thing to do, or should
I mean, that's an English rule. It's nothing to do with Hebrew.
Okay. So I had
The young
Yehovah.
people say all caps are shouting, so we probably shouldn't. Maybe you want to shout his name, though. I don't know.
I just wanted to give him proper deference. I didn't know. I had Yehovah speak to me audibly one time in a dream.
Wow.
And if it wasn't him, it was his angel.
Okay.
It's only happened one time in my life. Not before, not since. And I was in Panama at the time. And I was depressed. I was just battling heaviness. And, I had a business that was going good, but I just, had mood swings. And I thought, man, do I need psychotropic drugs? I'm having depression hit me. And I cried out to the Lord. And he heard my cry. And I had a dream one night. And I heard God audibly speak to me in my dream. He said, quote, "You and your brother Damon have a generational curse you need to break." I woke up Saturday morning. I realized I hadn't went back to my bed. I had fallen asleep on my couch. And I had my Bible there in the armrest, and I just lifted it up. And I woke up at Saturday morning. I'm like, man. I opened the Bible, and I just set my eyes on the scripture. I don't remember what scripture it was. And the dream came back, the voice. I didn't see God. I just heard the voice. You and your brother Damon have a generational curse you need to break. So my brother Damon called me about 2 days later. He said, man, I got to tell you about this book. You got to get it. It's by Derek Prince. It's called The Blessing or the Curse You Choose. It's about breaking generational curses. And Derek Prince, he loved Israel, loved Jerusalem, a great Bible scholar. He did a teaching on how, I think, Deuteronomy 27 and 28 and Leviticus, there are commands that are in effect today. And if you run awry of them and break them, you can do it to your own peril. And it says, God visits the iniquities of the fathers to the third and fourth generation of those that hate him. So, for example, if you're involved in incest, God will curse you. If you want to get involved with witchcraft, you're going to have a curse. Curse of the bastard, etc. There's a whole bunch of them. If you do this, I'm going to curse you. But if you do this, I'll bless you. So my brother said, man, you got to read this book. And I said, man, Damon, I got to tell you about this dream. I heard God tell us we got a generational curse. Now, he told me that our half brother who lived in Jacksonville, Florida, was laying on his bed. And he said a demon, an evil spirit, jumped on him. He was awake and began to choke him out like this. And he screamed out the name of Yeshua, Jesus in English. And he said the thing let go and ran out and slammed the door. He was so traumatized by it, he had found a workshop on breaking generational curses. God was speaking to us. And I didn't know what to do. They didn't teach on generational curses. But I take it very serious. And that's why I asked the question about menstruation and, these.
And isn't it interesting, Ezekiel 18, where we looked at the verse that talks about not having sex with a menstruating woman, is specifically about generational curses. I mean, look, Ezekiel 18 is an entire passage that starts off with a proverb, and the proverb is the fathers eat sour grapes, and the teeth of the sons are set on edge, meaning you bear the consequences of what your ancestor did or what your father did. And God says, no, we're not going to do that. That's not how. Here's how it works. And the way it works is that you do not carry the generational curse if you repent. You also don't carry the generational blessing if you turn away from the way of God, right? That's what Ezekiel 18 says.
So God's not going to kill us for something our parents did necessarily, but you could feel the brunt
Only
of
if
it.
you continue in that sin.
Okay. So we had a quandary here. Now, God was trying to help us out. He said, you got an issue. Come to find out, on my dad's side, my great-grandfather dies at 52. That's not natural. My grandfather died at 58. A year later, my dad died at 57, a year from that dream. I said, man, people are dying early before the time. This is not natural. This is a curse. Came to find out, my great-grandfather was involved in idolatry. He became a Freemason. And he became a third-degree master Mason. And those people over in the lodge, even if they don't know it, they basically have bowed themselves to the demon of the lodge, Baphomet, Ahura Mazda. Some have told me that you only find out about in the higher ranks, like at 33rd degree. But he had gotten involved in idolatry, and God brought a bloodline curse on us. And there was also divorce that went 4 generations, whoremongering. And we had some sins to repent of that had never been repented of. Nobody ever dealt with them. And that death curse hit my dad. He died a year later of cancer.
Hmm.
So we didn't know what to do. But my brother said, hey, this book will tell us what to do. So we repented of our sins, said, God, forgive us, forgive our ancestors for idolatry, fornication, adultery, whatever we could think of. And we meant business. And we repented and we broke that curse. We stood on Galatians 3:13, broke that curse, name of Yeshua, and I'm 55 now. If I can outlive my great grandfather, we broke that curse. I think we did, but listen, we cannot take these curses for granted because God blesses and he curses. That's my understanding. Would you agree? Does God today bless and curse?
Well, I mean that we were looking earlier. I think weren't we looking at Deuteronomy 30? Let's look at that passage because
yes.
If you ask me what my favorite verse is in the Bible,
what is it?
My favorite story is the story of Josiah, but my favorite verse or my favorite passage is Deuteronomy 30 verses 15 to 20. And in Deuteronomy 30, he says, see, I place before you today life and good and death and evil, that I am commanding you today to love Yehovah your God, to walk in his ways and to keep his commandments and his statutes and his judgments. And you will live and you will multiply, and Yehovah your God will bless you on the earth that you are coming to inherit it. Then this is verse 17 of Deuteronomy 30. And if your heart turns and you do not obey, and you are cast off and you bow down to other gods, I tell you today that you will surely be destroyed. You will not lengthen your days upon the earth, which you are passing over the Jordan to come in there to inherit it. And he says in verse 19, I testify in you, or I testify against you today, the heavens and the earth. I call as testimony the heavens and the earth. Life and death I place before you, the blessing and the curse. And this is the greatest line here. Choose life in order that you will live, you and your descendants, to love Yehovah your God, to obey his voice, and to cling unto him. For he is your life and the length of your days, to dwell upon the earth that Yehovah your God swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to give to them. So he says, I place before you today life and good and death and evil. Choose life that you may live. Right? That's the central message of the Torah. That's the central message of the Hebrew Bible in a nutshell. Is it's up to you. You can choose life or death, good or evil. Choose life because you'll live and you'll have a blessing. If you choose evil, you'll have a curse and you'll die.
Man, I want the blessing, not the curse. Nehemia, what's next for you right now? What are you working on currently?
So, I'm working on a bunch of things. One of the really exciting things is Institute for Hebrew Bible Manuscript Research, ihbmr.com. That's the research institute that I founded. We've got some of the top scholars in the world that are working with the IHBMR, and we are working to make Hebrew Bible manuscripts accessible to the world. Right now, it is painful to try and access some of the manuscripts that have already been digitized and made available. We're trying to make that much easier so that scholars can, at their fingertips, and even laymen can, at their fingertips, they want to pull up Deuteronomy 30, they should be able to do that in seconds in the Hebrew manuscripts that have survived. So that's one of the really exciting things I'm working on right now.
Now tell me about your websites. You've got nehemiaswall.com.
So nehemiaswall.com, that's mine. I'm Nehemia and I built the wall, right? There's the character Nehemiah in the Bible. And there we have, that's my ministry website. And yeah, that's where I do teachings on the Hebrew scriptures and New Testament as well in some instances. All kinds of interesting things. My wife now has a podcast called The Wise Purpose that you can also access. It's on YouTube, I think, and I believe it's also on different social media. And yeah, so that is what we have going on.
How can we partner with you? And do you have membership available?
So people who donate to the ministry and support it, they get access to more teachings that we make available specifically to the donors. There's different levels. We have something now called the Scholar Club, where we're getting together monthly, and we are doing live teachings. We just did one yesterday for the general public, 2 days ago for the general public on Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, or Pentecost in Christianese, and sharing some fascinating things I discovered while I was preparing the teaching. I learn new things every year and every day. So
Wow.
that's
Now,
an opportunity to share with the public.
tell me about your YouTube channel. Where can they find you, and where can they go to subscribe?
So they can go to nehemiaswall.com and you can subscribe there. I've got a newsletter that comes out every week, free newsletter. It'll inform you about all the updates. They have wherever you find podcasts, you'll find my podcast. Just type in Nehemiah's Wall or Nehemiah Gordon. It's on YouTube. We've got a TikTok channel. We're on Facebook. We're, I don't know, wherever you get your podcasts, iTunes, all the different podcast outlets as well.
Now, we saw Sister Gordon's YouTube channel. Miss Gordon, what is your wife's first name?
My wife's name is Linnell Gordon.
So in the church, we would call her Sister Gordon.
Oh, Sister Gordon. Okay.
So Sister Linnell, I saw her YouTube. Hey, that's really good. Good teaching there and testimony. Folks, we'll put a link up here in the show notes. You need to get over and subscribe to Nehemia's YouTube channel. Go to nehemiaswall.com. You can sign up and support the ministry there. Nehemia, are there any universities or locations on the board for this year that you need to go out and do some more examination of scrolls?
I generally don't tell people where I'm going until I've already been there.
Okay, that's
just as a security matter.
Yes.
But yes, there are some things that I have on the agenda, some international travel to examine some manuscripts. I'll be able to tell you about those after I've already come back.
I almost forgot. I got to show you one bonus. Can you hold 1 second?
Sure.
I got a second.
Ooh, what do we have here? Let's unroll that. That's
Nehemia.
Roll, it looks like.
Now you know that I'm in Indonesia, right?
I did not know that. No.
No, I've been in Bali now for 9 years.
Oh, I was not aware of that.
Largest Muslim nation in the world. I may have the only Hebrew scroll in all of Indonesia.
Okay, let's see what you got.
Okay, now I got this at a Michael Rood expo many years ago, and I bought it. It was a leaf, I think of. Let me see if I can get this up here.
I actually can't see it now. It kind of disappeared. I think if you bring it too close, it becomes part of the background.
Yes, let me turn my background off.
Oh, okay.
That's gonna be better.
Nice.
Now I don't know if I have it upside down or not.
No, it's not upside down. Yeah.
You want me to go closer to the screen?
No. Can you move it over a little bit to your left? Oh,
tell me if I'm going the right direction.
Yeah, that's right.
Now,
is
this Hebrew?
Like
Aramaic?
That's Hebrew. So you're looking there at like the one passage I just read was Numbers 17.
I should probably have this with gloves on. Forgive me.
No, they don't use gloves anymore. We used to use gloves, and they say you want to wash your hands, that's for sure, and dry them well. The reason we don't use gloves is they used to use these white gloves, and some people still require nitrile gloves. I've been made to put on gloves, but generally they try to avoid them because you don't have the dexterity and you end up breaking the corners and the edges.
Okay.
That's frankly more of a problem with books, meaning a codex, than it is with a scroll. This is a scroll, obviously. Piece of the scroll.
You want me to come closer?
No. I can read it just fine. Yeah.
Rick, can you read a little bit for me?
If you move over to your right, because it's kind of cut off. So, all right, there it is. So we have here the third line is the beginning of a section, and the section there is Deuteronomy 17, verse 9. It says, "Vayidaber Yehovah el Moshe, and Yehovah said to Moshe Lemor, saying, Heromu mitoch ha'edah hazot, va'achale otam karega." He says, "Raise yourself up from this congregation, and I will consume them in a moment." Vayiplu al pnehem, and they fell upon their faces. Vayomer Moshe el Aaron, and Moses said to Aaron, "Kach et hamach." This is the rebellion of Korah, right? Of Korah, who he says, "Hey, God didn't just speak to you, Moses. Why are you so special?" And they have this challenge, and then there's a plague that comes upon the camp. So that's the passage we're reading here.
I was told. Let me show you the back. I was told this was smuggled out of a country in a tire axle. It would have been destroyed otherwise. and I
Okay.
bought it back in 2007 at the Jonah Code conference.
Oh, okay.
Now, what do you think this thing's made out of? Is this calf
That's
leather?
Oh, I couldn't tell you what animal, but it's definitely leather. People
Now-
who can tell you what animal, I find that a bit dubious. I'm not. There are some scholar or scientists who have started to do research to distinguish between. Now it's upside down. Between the different animals. I'm not. And there's some publications recently trying to do that based on hair patterns. I definitely can't see it well enough, and I don't know enough about it to be able to say which animal. Probably it's a cow, just because that's what they usually made them out of.
Now, this is a Deuteronomy?
No, this is number 17 is the one.
Oh, this is numbers in. Okay, I had my.
If you move it over all the way, and I get them confused, the other direction. No, yeah, go the other direction. Yeah, the way you're going now, go all the way to run one direction to the upper right, and I'll tell you where it starts. Wait, stop here. So it's
By the way, is this Masoretic?
One
Do you
second.
see any pointers?
No, there's no vowels here. This doesn't. The scrolls generally don't have vowels.
Okay.
It's very rare for them to have vowels. So it starts in Numbers 15, verse 24, in the middle of the verse. If you want to make a note of that somewhere, and then if you go to the opposite corner, meaning the bottom of the next side, I can tell you where it goes up until. So it's from Numbers 15:24. That's or Elazar. So it goes up until Numbers 19:3.
Nehemia, you mean to tell me a human being, a scribe, did this by hand?
Oh yeah, for sure.
And what would they have used? I wonder how old this thing is. Could it be just a few hundred?
Probably only 200-300 years old would be my guess from what I can see here.
Tell me how I should store this to protect it.
So I actually have I have a few pieces of scrolls, and I was advised by a rabbi who restores old Torah scrolls, and he said you could just put it in a picture frame. That was his advice.
Okay.
And I have let's see, do I have 2 or 3 scrolls? I don't remember. I have one Yemenite, and then I have one of mine is in Israel. So I have one that's similar to that. That's in Israel, and I was told by that particular rabbi, my piece was from North Africa and 200 years old. I don't know that he really knows. There's not enough study that's been done on this. Right? Meaning the way they wrote 100 years ago and the way they wrote 300 years ago didn't change that much, quite frankly.
When you were reading, I got chills. I honestly think that this may be the only Hebrew scroll in all of Indonesia.
Wow.
And I brought it into my suitcase. It was in storage in America, and I went back last year, and I got it. I'm honored to have this, and I also have a shofar, which I like to blow.
Wow.
I'm honored to have it. I'm honored to have you here tonight. And Nehemia, we would love to have you back on again. Thank you so much for spending some time with us tonight. Once again, if someone would like to contact you and support your work, what's the best way to do that?
Go to nehemiahswall.com, and you can sign up there for a free newsletter. You can donate to the ministry. There's a contact form you can write, and there's people who will read it. Not necessarily me, but somebody will.
Please thank your wife for letting us take you for 3 hours today for our super marathon. And my friend, would you be so kind as to close us in prayer? Could you pray a blessing over the people out there tonight?
So this is the blessing that God gave to Aaron and his descendants in number 6. Yevarechecha Yehovah v'yishmerecha. Yehovah bless you and keep you. Ya'el Yehovah panav elecha v'chuneka. Yehovah shine his face towards you and be gracious towards you. Yisa Yehovah panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. Yehovah lift his face towards you and give you peace. Amen.
Bonus question.
Yeah.
I've heard that the priest would do this. What does this mean?
Ooh. So one version of the story says that, so it says in the priest will place his name upon they will place my name upon the children of Israel. And so there's Jewish sources that say this was a way of spelling out the name. It's kind of upside down, actually. Yud He Vav He.
Wow.
That this was a hand gesture because they weren't allowed to speak it because of rabbinical tradition. So they made hand gestures, kind of like Jewish sign language. Yud He Vav He.
Do you ever pray? Do you ever pray with your hands like that?
I don't, because I'm not a Kohen. I'm not a
Okay.
priest. But the
It's okay.
Kohanim, when they only Kohanim really do that. Anybody can say the priestly blessing, but Kohanim generally are traditionally the ones who do that. So,
My friend, thank you so much for spending
right.
time with us. We got 1,000,001 questions next time. We'll
Sounds
see you
good.
again.
Bye-bye.
We'll send you a copy. God bless you, brother.